Okay, good morning everyone. I'm Robert Gordon and I'm one of the members of the committee that runs the Cambridge Italian Research Network, CIRN, or CIRN, as it's sometimes known, and this network is the kind of starting point for the event today, so I'm just going to say hello and introduce the event and then pass on to Giovanna Di Matteo, who is the convener of today's wonderful conference. So just to explain briefly, for those of you who are new to Cambridge or to this network, this conference is essentially triply sponsored by three different kind of institutions or sources. One is CIRN or CIRN, and we've been going for about 10, 12 years, drawing together as many people as we can within Cambridge who research in different ways and across all the disciplines we can find on things Italian. And one of the initiatives we set up now 3 years ago was a visiting fellowship in which a scholar, an early career scholar, comes to Cambridge for a term, carries on their research, draws together, makes the interdisciplinary connections as they're here, and also organises a symposium like today. We gave a theme to a cycle of these fellowships, which was Diverse Italy, and this is the third of those daily symposia following that theme. Is this me talking? Am I too close to it?
No, I think, do we want to check if there's someone
on?
Can everyone make sure that the microphones are off, please, so we don't have...
I think you can close the microphone.
We can do it somehow.
Great.
Yeah, there's someone coughing.
Let's go.
So yes, sorry. Yeah. So this is the third. We're delighted to have got through this cycle with three very different and rich conference events or symposia. Just briefly, the first 2 years ago was convened by Vera Schultz and was entitled Between the Black Mediterranean and the Black Atlantic, Complexifying Stories of Connectivity and Resistance, and Vera came from an art history background. The second, a year ago, was convened by Gianmarco Mancoso, who's here today, so it's lovely to make that connection as well. Gianmarco's conference, I need to get the title right, was called Italy's Imperial Debris, Spaces, Objects and Fantasies of an Unburied Colonial Past. And today's Islands as Crossroads, we'll hear more about that from Giovanna. So it's been extremely rich and interesting. It's sort of ticked the box in terms of interdisciplinarity and of opening up to us here in Cambridge lots of new research perspectives and methodologies and new research going on in this broad area of diverse Italy. So we're absolutely delighted to have carried through this cycle and to bring it to its third iteration today. One of the ways that this fellowship and this symposium has worked so successfully, one of the main reasons, is that we were very lucky to get CRASSH to collaborate with us. So CRASSH, the Centre for Research in Arts and Social Sciences and Humanities, 2 S's for those of you who are not from Cambridge, lives in this building and agreed to support this fellowship and indeed to host the visiting fellow for the term that they spend here. So we need to thank CRASSH very warmly. Zeynep is here, who's helped us organise these events. So many thanks to Zeynep, who's taken on an awful lot of work helping us logistically to set this up. And indeed to Joanna Page, the director of CRASSH, who's been very generous in her support as well. And then, you know, the brass tacks, we have to get down to money. This event is supported financially by the Intesa Sanpaolo Fund, which is sponsored, as you'll know if you know anything about Italy, by a bank, financial institution in Italy, which provides a fund to support this kind of research on and related to Italy in Cambridge. And CIRN as a network has been supported in the past very generously by Keith Sykes, who's with us today as well. So thanks very much to you and to Intesa Sanpaolo for that support. Just to say that CIRN is also running other initiatives and other events. We have an annual lecture every year. This year it was given by Chris Clark, the eminent Cambridge historian. And we run our own symposium once a year, and this should take place this year on June the 5th. So look out for announcements about that as well. So I'll leave the introductions there just to say thanks so much to Giovanna for being here, for organising this wonderful event. It's been great to have you around Cambridge, and I'll hand over to Giovanna to introduce the day.
Thank you. So first of all, good morning everyone. I'm really excited to be here and see you all here online and in presence. I want to start thanking a few people. First of all, of course, the CIRN, or CERN, the Cambridge Italian Research Network, and of course CRASSH, for the opportunity to organize this symposium today, but most of all for giving me also the chance to spend a few months here in Cambridge, which was a very important and enriching experience for me. Of course, I want to also thank all of the people who made this possible. So Zainab, Kazmak, Milne, and all CRASH team for helping me on the organizational and administration side. Robert Gordon, Mary Leven, and Fernanda Gallo for insights and suggestions coming here. And of course, all of you speakers who are with us today to kind of engage with what will be the topic we'll discuss. All of you that are here for being as a public, but also to Erika Belia for her great support with the dissemination and communication about this symposium, without which I would be completely lost. So thanks everyone, and I really hope we will engage in a prolific discussion about islands as crossroads, reimagining mobilities in the Mediterranean, which is the topic of the title of the symposium. Before delving in, I really would like to spend a few minutes, and I'm sorry because I'm going to get emotional here. Yeah, I hope this came out later. So yeah, before going in more in details on the topic of the symposium, I'm going to read, it's going to be easier. I want to spend a few words to remember Professor Federica Letizia Cavallo. Oh my God, I can't.
Don't worry, John.
To whom I owe my greatest thanks for being here today, discussing. Okay, I'll wait a minute, I guess. I was going to say, discussing the fascinating issues concerning islands and mobilities. Federica left us prematurely last September 16th, but the work she leaves behind is a crucial legacy for Mediterranean island studies. Federica was a geographer. She completed her PhD at the University of Bologna with a thesis on the concept of insularity applied to the case study of Menorca in the Balearic Islands, from which she published a book, Isole al Bivio, Minorca tra Balearizzazione e Valorizzazione Territoriale, which could be roughly translated as islands at crossroads, Menorca between Balearicization and territorial values, from which you can understand the title of this symposium today. So a book that provided a profound insight not only to the theme of insularity, but also into the geohistorical framework of the Minorcan island microcosm, where the founding and explanatory elements of its atypicality in the Mediterranean context are traced, highlighting its landscape territorial inheritances and the consequent tourist development. Federica continued to delve into the realm of island studies and insularity until the first symptoms of her illness emerged, hindering her from traveling to the island of Socotra in Yemen. I'm really sorry for this. To conduct her fieldwork there. However, it did not deter her from contributing her rich and enthusiastic insights to the research on community-based fishing tourism on Socotra, which she had the joy to see published last year. Her work on island was extensive and encompassed islands across Europe, including her beloved Venetian Lagoon, of course, and the islands that comprise it. I want to dedicate this event to her memory And the best way to honor her is by sharing her perspective on one island she cherished deeply, Menorca again. So I aim to introduce today the theme of islands and immobilities through a short video Federica filmed for the Omero Urban Video Award in 2022, which is titled Turban Simulacrum. So I'll be happy to share with you, and then we can get started. Just a couple of words to link this video and the choice of showing it to the topic of today. Drawing on Federica's own words, this video shows a walk in a tourist resort in the Mediterranean at the time of the year which usually corresponds to the seasonal opening. However, it is spring 2021, and due to COVID-19 pandemic, the resort has been closed and left to itself almost a year and a half. One of the most relevant recurring features of these turban simulacra, and I can add personally of islands themselves very often, is their sharp seasonality, swinging from the lively mood of the bathing season to the ghost town atmosphere of low season. Throughout the pandemic, this atmosphere has spread even in the real cities and on mainland, while the sound of nature, indifferent to any human voiceless SOS, have gained new prominence. So yeah, I think that you clearly showed what we can, like one of the ways we can look at mobilities and immobilities on islands, in the Mediterranean in this case, but of course it could be a trace to follow also in other geographical contexts. I will still steal a couple of minutes to get into our topic again, talking about islands and mobilities, immobilities, to then leave the floor to our first speakers to the session. So an island, I guess, is always a concrete incarnation of one possibility among many, and the concept of islandness itself is always relative and plural, and it depends on the historical and anthropogeographical characteristics as much as on the physical ones. Nonetheless, relations with what is external to the island is important to the definition of the island identity, as a complex play of exchanges, material and immaterial flows would actually mold it. So island status, for more than 2 decades by now, even more than probably, I've gone through a spatial and mobility turn, which led scholars to focus on tracing networks, multiple and interconnected relational mobilities and immobilities, island assemblages and movements, initiating and inviting us to an archipelagic thinking. So in this sense, thinking of the island as relational space have problematized the idea of island as static, isolated, dependent and peripheral, as well as problematizing the idea of the island as something natural. This demonstrating how islands are actually fully immersed in the logics of globalisation and engaged with both human and non-human mobilities and immobilities. However, in this mobile world, where even such a striking event as COVID-19 pandemics was able to stop us only partially and for a relatively short time, we cannot risk reproducing the idea of mobility straightforward as freedom. Therefore, while embracing the fertile possibilities opened by the spatial and mobility turn, I want to underline we are always required to remember that connectivities, space-time compression, and immobilities can produce geographies of exclusion, disconnection, inequality, and forced immobility. So being fully immersed in these logics of globalization, islands and archipelagic thinking are not exempt from the risk of romanticization of mobility and connectivity. I guess that more than ever today, as we find ourselves in a time of crisis where climate change poses a threat on both human and non-human life, on islands as well as on mainland actually. Simultaneously we see war and violence, well, we can also say the word genocide at this point, I would say, encroach upon the shores of the Mediterranean and farther away around the world. Rather than dismantling barriers, artificial islands are constructed to segregate those deemed unworthy of residing in our democratic Europe. So global relations and connections are primarily harnessed to fuel a capitalist economy benefiting the few at the expenses of the many. In this complex context, islands there, I think, I really believe, with their rich and intricate current realities and histories, emerge as a product of this world. They possess at the same time the ability to reflect it, revealing hidden aspects and serving as exemplary sites for condensation. So despite and through these challenges, islands still have much to teach us, I guess, offering valuable insight to guide us towards a collective reflection, also for a better future, we hope, for everyone. So with this very happy introduction, I will stop here, leave the floor to Fernanda Gallo, who's going to be chairing the first session. And again, thank you everyone for being here, and I hope you enjoy this event.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. This is a difficult act to follow, so I'll keep it brief. We start our first session that's called Islands and Immobilities with two speakers. The first is Arturo Gallia, who is a researcher. Gallia. Sorry.
You're still Italian. What kind of
I'm Gallo, so you know I tend to go in that direction. Who is a researcher in geography at the University of Roma 3, and he teaches history of cartography and of geography. So his research topics include island societies in the modern contemporary Mediterranean, and historical cartography and history of geography. And he's the PI of one of the PRIN, who is not familiar with the PRIN, is a research project, is the PI for a PRIN of 2022 on islands for the future. And he has published many volumes, among them Le risorse idriche dell'isola di Ponza with Carocci in 2019, Geografie, itinerari geostorici e geografici dei paesaggi visitati in 2023, and Evangelista Azie, cartografo risorgimentale, also in 2023. So our second speaker that is also with us today, Stefano Malatesta, is an associate professor at the Faculty of Geography at Bicocca, Milano Bicocca, and he works with the board of the Mare Center and the executive committee of the International Small Islands Studies Association. So he teaches human geography, a small island system, and geography of tourism. And he also has been awarded from the Italian Geographical Society a prize for the best under 40s geographies.
Years ago.
Well, still an achievement. So this morning is dedicated to small islands in two different ways, a more historical perspective. That's our first speaker, whose title is Italian Small Islands in Late Modern Era, Moving, Populating and Controlling the Maritime Space. And our second speaker is going to be a more contemporary perspective, and the title of his talk is Small Islands, Geographies of Temporality, a Cyclical Fractal, a Future Beyond Seasonal Adjustments. Thank you very much, and help me welcome our first speaker.
presentazione vado a scinata.
Okay. Good morning to all. Thank you to Giovanna for the invitation. Thank you all to introduce me. I'm talking about Italian small island in a geohistorical dimension, and trying to show you something about the mobilities through the island and from the mainland to the islands. And I'm going to talk about the Tyrrhenian Sea and the southern Italy in late modern era. And I'll try to highlight some aspects could be interesting for our dialogue. Very, very fast. Sorry for the font. As we know, as all we know, we say the Mediterranean is a sea that has an highly insular, a lot of island, more or less 200 inhabited island, close or not so far from the mainland. And as Predrag Matveyevich said, the island is the better geographical elements, social element, could reveal us the future of the Mediterranean as a sea, but also as a social, multi-social region. So I would highlight on the Tyrrhenian Sea, on the southern part, that during the modern era was under the direct or indirect government of the Spanish crown. Sardinia, Sicilia, and the Kingdom of Naples were under the Spanish influence, and islands played a role for some reason very interesting. The main groups of the island, just to repeat, are the Ponziane Island in the northern part, under the Kingdom of Naples, Ischia and Capri and Procida in front of Naples, Aeolian Islands in the northeast part of Sicily, Ustica, Egadi Island and Pelagie Island. This distribution permits us to highlight the island as a part of a defense system. As we know, the Kingdom of Naples and the Kingdom of Sicily were defended by a chain of coastal tower. There are a lot of studies about this point, and islands were included in this chain as element into the sea for a maritime control. When at the end of 16th century Philip II, King of Spain, promoted the fortification of the Mediterranean coast, islands were one of the points that he highlighted to defend the coast of the Spanish kingdoms. And so we can trace a line of defense as shown on the map. The geographical position of the island could us to diversify the islands between their role played. For example, Egadi, by the actors in those islands, are called as a border, as a frontier of the kingdom, where and Ponziane Island too as frontier border with the Papal State or other states. Aeolian are defined periphery, not frontier, because there is an internal frontier from Sicily to Naples, but periphery. So not close to the capital, and in a geographical position, peripheral. To control this chain of defense, there were some problems, as we know. There are few islands that were inhabited, and one of the problems is the population of this island. Populating to control was one of the points of Carlo di Borbone, Charles of Bourbon, King of Naples, in the starting of 18th century. He understood that the control of these peripheral territories into the sea was a key to control the maritime space and to defend the kingdom, the crown, and the capital. Charles was king in May of 1734. In October of the same year, promoted a population of the island of Ponza in the border, maritime border with Papal state. We see very, very fast the population of this island, but he promoted this population in 3 phases, and we'll see. Not only the island of Ponza in the north, but also the island of Ventotene in the same century, but few years ago, and then the population of the island of Ustica. Populating to control to defend the maritime space. He moved people from other islands for Ponza and Ustica. He moved people from mainland for Ventotene. Focusing on the island of Ponza, we can see through the historical sources or historical maps, as this from 16th century, there's not a urban settlement. There's not houses or public buildings, just towers and churches from medieval monastery. A lot of towers, more than in reality in this map. This map shows a lot of towers, trying to show the defense, the very strong defense of the island, but just as an instrumental communicating of the map. The islands were into a network, informal network of routes into the Tyrrhenian Sea, routes made by fishermen, by pirates, and this would has the necessity to control better the island. When Philip II promoted the fortification of Mediterranean coast and the islands, the Ponziane Island, were to be under this process, there was a question. These islands are from Naples or from Rome, from the Papal State, because are on the borders. With investigation about this island, the property, at the end, Philip II decided that the islands are close to Naples, belong to Naples Kingdom. In this investigation, this map, following the written relation, and it's very interesting because show the main island, Ponza, the island smaller, Palmarola, Zannone and Ventotene, the fortification that should be done, that should be realized into the island, and other information, logistical information. For example, the distance between the island and the coast. Here we have Roma. Roma is not on the sea as a port, but generally was indicated not so close to the coast. Anzio, Nettuno, Monte Circeo, the Mount of Circeo, Terracina, and the frontier, the border between Papal State and the Kingdom of Naples, where we have Sperlunga, Gaeta, the main city. And then we have other two indications, very interesting. It's very small, but trust me. We have the symbol of several cisterns to collect rainwater from Roman era, and this double circle symbol that indicates two wells digged by Turks. If Turks had the time to construct, to dig two wells where get water, next time the Turks from the island will attack the capital of Naples. Obviously, it's a instrumental political information, but necessary to to let the king Philip II to say this island belong to Naples, and we have to fortificate with tower and defend this maritime space. Just a view comprise what we can see Monte Circeo and Gaeta, more or less, is here. This is the island of Ponza. I said about the population of the island of Ponza, promoted by Charles of Bourbon. The first population and the second in 1768 are promoted, transferring peoples, families from the island of Ischia to Ponza. The third one from Torre del Greco. Torre del Greco was a settlement where they worked the coral to transform into jewelry, and there was a lot of relation between the island of Ponza and the travelers and the workers of Torre del Greco. The area of first settlement is close to the main bay, where today there is the port, and when the families were transferred into the island, they placed themselves in different places, in different areas of the island. And today the place names were remembering the name of the families. Where the family Scotto placed is called Scotti. Where there was the Guarino family is Guarini, from singular to plural, and Conti at the same. Where the main family called Mazzella was around the monastery, the ruins of the monastery of Santa Maria. The place name, the historical place name, was stronger to the new one, and today this area is not called Mazzella but Santa Maria, remembering the monastery. The first two phases interested the area of the port. The third one, the northern part, forward the northwest maritime space. From this kind of population, we can ally some model of settlement, generally on the hills of the islands with terraced lands, and through the terraced lands we can have rural settlement or urban settlement with buildings for houses and storage. And the model is the same. A central walkway to go from down to up and from up to down, sometimes with stairs, sometimes without, and on the left and the right the rural settlements or the buildings. Historical maps or historical photographs permit us to see this model. The kind of houses are in caves or built houses, and there are a lot of models that are reconstructed by architects or archaeological surveys. The area of the greatest interest of the island is the bay, where today there is the port, and the second phase of populating was accompanied with a transformation, with a new urban settlement. There is not a city, but a founded settlement. And Antonio Whisper, an engineer, military engineer from the Kingdom of Naples, realized the port. And the port was very, very symbolic, because there is the religious power, the political power, the military power, and this area where is the commercial. This is the commercial settlements in a 3-level system, with storage for fish boat, the shops on the main road, and houses. In 3 levels we can have the system of this settlement. And as we can see in a comparative image, the port is the same, more or less, of today. This is the settlement founded during the population phases, and today there are some changes, obviously, but the main design is the same. Something interesting about mobility, we can see the transferring the mobility of people to populate. We can see the mobility of the engineer to plan the new settlement, but we can see also the mobility, the transferring, the forced transferring of people that have to work on the construction of the new port and new settlement. There were people from jail in the mainland transferred into the island, and they were placed into different areas. Inside a cistern, a Roman cistern, or inside what it called in this map bagno dei forzati. The cistern, the Roman cistern, were so big that used to let the people, the workers, live there. The same was in Ventotene, and the other one is a cave where the stones were get off, and there, in the same place, they lived. They lived where they work the stones. Another image of the Bagno Grande, a Roman cistern, close to the area of work. Okay. I don't speak about Ventotene, but the question there is very, very similar. This is another image. About Ustica, where and then I'm going to end. The founded settlement has a shape that is influenced by the morphology of the island. In Ustica, later, we're at the second half of the 18th century, the new settlement, the founded settlement, repeat model used by Spanish crown in other areas of Spain, Iberian Peninsula, in Minorca, and in the Americas. And the settlement of Ustica has this model, this scheme, that we can see in several maps and in a satellite image of the urban settlement of Ustica. Closing, we can see there are some mobilities, few immobilities, more mobilities from mainland or from coastal island to islands, and we can see a defense system of the capitals, Naples and Palermo. We can see the island in a defense system of Naples and Salerno, productive city, and Palermo. And about Naples, we can see at the end of the 18th century a first line of defense with Ischia and Capri at the initial part of the Gulf of Naples, and the islands of Ponza and Ventotene as antemural, the first wall in maritime space facing north. And Palermo was defended by Egadi, surely, but also from by Ustica as wall in maritime space. So islands seen as crossroads for mobilities of different typologies of people. It's always a decision by a political government, not from a bottom decision, and more or less always in a relation with the mainland. So we can see a double role of the island in as nodes, crossroad of a network in maritime spaces, but also, and this is the moment maybe, that place the island as periphery of the mainland for the Italian small island of the southern. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, we'll have first our second speaker and then we have the debate.
Okay.
Yeah?
Before starting my speech, my personal memory of Federica dates back summer 2016 in Naples, so in the Mediterranean, of course. When together with Elena Delagnese we decided to create the first working group on islands in the community of Italian geographers. And the current chair of this group is Arturo, and so I guess that today we have two human legacies of Federica here, so Giovanna and Arturo. Ciao Fede. I'm doing something that I never do, so I'm reading my speech because it's the first time that I try to present this idea as in a speech and with a complete structure, I hope, of course. Many concepts and visions we are discussing today play with dialectics, mobility versus immobility, past versus future. I've decided to react to this background by adding others binary duos, linearity versus circularity, and European development policies versus small islands' everyday life. Without directly answering the question about the future of Italian small islands, I'm sorry, Giovanna, but trying to propose a descriptive model of the temporality of small islands which will help us to use these dialectics when we think about the future of small archipelagos, islanders, particularly young people. In fact, this reflection is closely linked to the project, the research project directed by Arturo on the future of young people on the Italian islands, or rather on the possibility they have of building a life project. No? Yeah, great. The speech follows this structure. I present three basic categories of small island temporality, then move to the European Union's current policy framework for peripheral regions and therefore for the Mediterranean islands. I understand this framework as one of the driving forces that construct at a political level, but also in popular culture, the image of the future of those places. An image, I state, based on the limited number of facets or development objectives. This basic exercise of policy reading, necessary synthetic as you can imagine, helps us to introduce the central dialectic of my speech. That is, the opposition between a linear, developmentalist vision of the future of island geographies and the awareness that everyday island geographies follow rhythm that integrate linearity and circularity. As Lefebvre reminded us, rhythm is always a relationship between linearity and repetition. This idea made me think months ago of designing the small island's time-space using the metaphor of the fractal. I'm therefore trying to articulate a description, also using quotes from informal interviews conducted in Lipari a few weeks ago, taken from the same project I mentioned before, that incorporates everyday geographies into alternative readings of the present and the future. The goal, I'm not achieving here of course, but only presenting it, is to think about policies that challenge the automatic association between seasonality and island future. This slide shows a powerful tool of time-space quantification for small islands, ferry and hydrofoil timetables on the lines connecting Sicily and the Aeolian archipelago. On the left, the mid-season timetable, on the right, the winter season timetable. I won't stress frequency today, although it's certainly one of the most important factors in a timetable. I just pointed out the actual possibilities of reaching the islands vary according to the season and the day of the week. The colors in the orangish circle that you find correspond to the days when boats are guaranteed. In addition, it can be seen that some islands, Lipari and Vulcano, have a greater number of connections, regardless of whether you are traveling in October, during the mid-season, or January, the low season, while others, Alicudi, have a much smaller number of connections. I have to admit that I'm former under-14 geographers, as you can see by... okay. This disparity corresponds to the typical organization of space according to the center-periphery model that we find in the geography of many Mediterranean archipelagos. Lipari is the center, Alicudi is the extreme periphery. Moreover, seasons are qualified according to meteorological features functional to the reproduction of the peak of touristic season in summer, regardless of the rhythm of public school agenda and social practices connected to islanders' daily lives. There will be many other implications to note, of course, but for now I will limit myself pointing out the quantification of time, seasonality and rhythm as three fundamental operators in understanding the temporalities of small islands. As I said at the beginning, we need to do an exercise of policy reading. In detail, I use three sources. 2 European Union reports on the impact of cohesion policy on European islands, 2013 and 2021 respectively, and the annual report on environmental challenges facing Italian islands released by CNR and Legambiente. CNR is the National Council for Research. Cohesion policy, currently covering the period 2021-2027, is European policy massively and practically influencing the development strategy of the Union on peripheral regions. Many major financial programs, I will only mention the funds for regional development, small-scale fisheries and scientific research across the Mediterranean, are supported by the cohesion policy. As you can read, the priority, and I'm quoting, of the cohesion policy is to correct imbalances between countries and regions. Its lexicon is deeply geographical if you read it as a spatial planning strategy. Eurostat identifies the island regions of the Union that can benefit from this strategy. Specifically, more than 20 million inhabitants are targeted by. However, as the map shows, this figure is heavily influenced by the presence of the European mega-islands, namely Ireland and Sicily, of course. In 2012, Armstrong and other island studies experts published a very comprehensive critical overview of the influence of the European Regional Development Fund on the geographies of certain European archipelagos. The Regional Development Fund is one of the instruments of the cohesion policy, and we are obviously taking a pre-Brexit study as an example. However, some of the elements identified by the authors are equally and currently relevant. The study shows how the fund supported development measures in three main areas: infrastructures, bridges, tunnels, ports, cables, new technologies, in line with the objective of creating smart islands, and above all, tourism, or rather the adjustment to one peak tourist season flows. The cohesion policy discussed in the paper in 2012 and the current one share a common thread: the definition of islands as less developed and peripheral regions. In addition, they identify a number of socio-economic challenges these regions deal with currently and in the future. In particular, the dependence on the mainland, lack of opportunities for young people, and I would add, especially in the construction of their life projects. The lack of public services, the development of basic infrastructure, the dependence on a limited number of economic activities, especially tourism, the seasonal economies, and the integration of tourism and traditional maritime sectors. Next Generation EU, Recovering a Resilient Plan for Italy, fully embodied these indications, and in 2021 has identified seasonal adjustments and connectivity infrastructures as the main axis to support small islands development. This slide I've tried to summarize from a perspective of a super classic island book of human geography, the characteristics of Italian island geographies, excluding the largest one, Sicily and Sardinia, and the most archipelago-like archipelago in the world, Venice, because their insularities, they don't fit with today's discussion. We have therefore 35 municipalities managing less than 30 islands, framing a jeopardized administrative geography. A large demographic delta between islands with thousands of permanent residents and others with a few dozen ones, hosting thousands of temporary residents during the peak of the summer season, of course. Large distances from urban ports, as in the case of Lampedusa, and islands that de facto are suburbs of urban areas, like the case of Procida. Almost 80% of the islands have no public hospital. In some cases, they provide health centers with no emergency facilities. And almost 66% of islands do not offer secondary education to young people. Many islands are dependent on supply vessels for water and diesel, and the vast majority bases their economy on investment in the development of seasonal summer tourism businesses with a high level of environmental impact. As a result of this exercise, we can state that these policies are inspired by a developmentalist vision of spatial planning, a progressive and linear idea of island temporalities, setting the implementation of connectivity as a key priority and identifying seasonal adjustments, the so-called deseasonalization, as a mantra. let's go back to the example of one of the main operators of temporality on small Italian islands, the ferry timetable. This view is confirmed. The combination of transports and transport networks and leisure geographies supports the idea that what Lefebvre called quantified time shapes an organized temporal linearity. A linearity that becomes a constitutive component of the way in which the social life of these places is organized from the outside. Insiders, as Baum and Hagen stressed, referring in their case to tourist destination in general, have very little agency in controlling the structural external factors that govern the tourist machine. Two other key elements of the social geography of islands are currently considered from a linear perspective. I'm referring to the mobility experiences of students in their school careers. In fact, if we consider the intra and extra archipelagic dynamics and the facts of human geography that I presented in the first part, most of the personal trajectories of boys and girls run from their islands to the mainland in a kind of 3 stages journey due to the lack of educational opportunities. The second key pattern, on the other hand, concerns the presentation of islands as vulnerable to major environmental challenges, climate change and loss of biodiversity, but also cultural challenges, crises of traditional sectors, for instance. And the identification of the development of newer sectors as a response to these challenges, implicitly, the future is proposed as a smart solution to a less developed, marginalized, and disadvantaged present. I've been thinking about these dynamics for years. I could see the potentiality that seasonal adjustments and integration between tourism and traditional sectors they have for the future of Italian islands. However, as a geographer, I felt that there was a lack of rigorous theoretical reflection, with the exception of the recent revisions of seasonality models and the studies on Italian islands heritage. During the field work carried out with Arturo and our colleague Elisabetta Biffi, it seems to me, at least I hope, that I began to understand the direction in which I should develop my theoretical reflection. Some of the informants with whom we spent the evenings of February in Lipari share with us some pretty illuminating narratives. The story of the secondary school teacher who lives in Milazzo in Sicily and who is regularly late because she arrives in Lipari every morning on the first hydrofoil and does not take part in the life of the school because she returns home as soon as the lesson is over. The story of some students who call themselves nomads and who in a way tell of a diaspora that after university the only hope of leaving the island yearns to return. There is an awareness among 16-year-old boys and girls that the lack of schooling leads to a limitation of choices. If you make a wrong choice, it's more difficult to go back and start again. Finally, summer as the season that changed social relationships. All these stories convince me that a serious reflection on the future of small islands cannot ignore the dialogue between the linearity proposed by policies and the understanding of the local dimensions of time-space geographies. So I went back to the authors who convinced me the most. First of all, the focus on May and Thrift's concept of social time, or rather, the making of social time. And indirectly, for the case that interests me, the interruption that social practices can cause in the mechanism of construction of the quantitative time. The question here is, who makes social time in such a place as a small island? In addition, as has already emerged in the presentation, the emphasis on the everyday, specifically Vallee's, daily trajectories of people and places. Everyday geographies may challenge the linear perspective through rhythm and through the continuous dynamism of speed and moments of stillness, day and night, waiting and transit. These ideas should not be considered in a vacuum, of course, but in relation to the social practices we are interested in. The social life of school community, for example, follows rhythms, seasons, and directions very different from those of mass tourism. Finally, Lefebvre's concept of the series of presents, in which I found, perhaps too easily of course, an alternative to the anxiety about the future that pervades island politics. To all this, because I'm a geographer, I added the scale. And so this fractal emerged. The diagram describes the cyclical nature of time on the island, organized into 3 scales: the day, the week, and the season. Consider it as a draft, please, because you are the first audience that I'm presenting this diagram. And as you can see by the line, is uncertain. I have associated each scale with an agent in Lefebvre lexicon, and a rhythm and a set of social practices. The aims are basically 2. The first one is to complete the dominant linear view with a model that uses the same concepts, focuses on the same problems, but adopts a different perspective, that of social life of islands and the groups that produce social life. In island studies, following Dennis Cosgrove's lesson, this will be called as an insider's view against the heterodirectional mechanism, the study of islands in their own term, quoting Grant McCall. Second, to look for common features in the geography of small Italian islands. As you can see, the scale of the day follows the rhythm of different phases of the day, to which correspond changes in the frequency of connection with other islands and the mainland. The agents are therefore the timetable, but also the way school days are scheduled. This rhythm describes a social practice of mobility that affects not only students, but also other mobile subjects. If we move to the second scale, the week, the rhythm is almost binary: working days versus the weekend, with all the practices that we can see in the mobility of commuters, but also of the short-term visitors. Do not forget that for many months of the year, the week is the unit of reference for the disembarkation of supply vessels. 1 per week in winter, 2 or 3 per week in summer. And finally, the seasonal scale. Will be better to say season using the plural, which can be 2 or 3, of course, depending on the seasonal model adopted. There are 2 players here, the tourist machine and the school year. The tourist machine is so pervasive that it's able to absorb any conflict. On some islands, for example, schools change their daily timetable as early as May in order to favor the employment of secondary school students in boating or hotelery during the afternoons. The rhythm is based on the peaks and determines the social, economic, and cultural lives of tourism. The tourism machine is so pervasive that it can create an high risk of monoeconomies as the policies, strategies, and plans agree. But it also acts in reproducing a small island time space functional to its needs. Business activities, labor market, public investments, the calendar of religious celebrations, they follow a rhythm that has 2 seasons, that of profit and that of preparing the island for profit. Ironically, as you can see, tourism machine also produces cyclical times. You work, you wait, you prepare, you work again. This is undoubtedly a reductionist view, I know. But it seems to me that it's a crucial background if we want to think seriously about the future of these places. As I told you, I would not give answer today, of course. The only point I want to stress is the need to complement this perspective, so the plan and strategy perspective, with analytical tools capable of grasping the complexity of life in these places, which, as everybody knows, they are remote, isolated, disadvantaged, vulnerable, and blah, blah, blah. Thank you.
Okay, so Giovanna asked me to share a couple of thoughts before opening up to the discussion. So I tend to do what Giovanna asks, so I will do that. Obviously for me it's quite difficult. I'm an historian, I'm not a geographer, so I try to look from my perspective, but there are many historians in the audience, so that might be that I don't feel so much alone. So the way in which small islands have been presented today, I found it very fascinating and made me immediately think about three main things that I want to share, and maybe then we'll open up to the discussion. The first one is more methodological and historiography. Now, the way in which we look at the Mediterranean is really, in a way, how Orden and Purcell taught us, that is via micro-regions, and micro-regions that are connected. And I was wondering to what extent these small islands are micro-regions in itself, or they are different micro-regions that have to interact with other parts of mainland Europe, I would say. So are they closed, are they open, and how small islands might fit in this narrative of the Mediterranean. Another element I wanted to share, because it made me think a lot, is because I was teaching on Tuesday to the students in my advanced paper about migrations in the Mediterranean, and really the EU policy and the Dublin system. And it made me think a lot how these peripheral regions become so central when it comes to handling migrations, and especially from 2015 onwards and the so-called refugee crisis. So my question would be more, to what extent the fortress of Europe are also, as we saw during the 18th century in the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, are still in a way there. Are small islands still a fortress, or used as a protection barrier for a different border? That's not the Papal State, but is a different kind of border. And that was another thought that I had. And this led me to a final idea that I wanted to share, that also connects with the video you show us. That probably because my husband worked all his life on urban sprawl and, consumo di suolo, so this is kind of a big thing that I'm thinking about a lot. And the environmental impact of these ghost spaces that we live for half of the year, or for 2 years in the case of COVID pandemic, on places that on which my question is mainly how this urban sprawl is even more devastating when the space is so small. So to what extent the scales that we looked as temporal scales, but also geographical and spatial scales, change when we interact, and to what extent that urges us to protect that much more. So, and with this thought, so I hope I did what you asked. I leave it really to the floor. I don't know if you want to share your comments on these, or you want to listen to other questions first.
Hello everyone, so it's my pleasure to introduce this session that is titled Materialities of Immobilities. Today we have 3 speakers. I'm going to introduce them now, and then we can do as we did this morning, so presentation back to back and then questions. So the first speaker is Elena Sottilotta. She's a research fellow at Murray Edwards College here in Cambridge. Her research interests include folk and fairy tale studies, intermedia studies, children's literature, Mediterranean studies, and island studies. She has recently published the essay Recollection of a Piccola Streghina, from the Heart of the Mediterranean, Gender and Class Consciousness in Grazia Deledda's Folkloric Writings. And this is published in Interdisciplinary Studies on the Mediterranean in 2023. She's the co-editor with Sara Del Medico of the special issue Women in Sardinia, Creativity and Self-Expression in Cronica Mundi, and she's also the founder of the Cambridge Research Network for Fairy Tale Studies. And her contribution is titled Weaving Magical Islandness, the Journey of Sardinian Fairies Across Centuries and Media. The second speaker is Lavinia Gambini, and she's a third-year PhD student in history at Jesus College, here in Cambridge as well. Her research investigates the presence and activities of non-elite Eastern Mediterranean practitioners, artisans, and retailers in early modern Italy. Before joining Cambridge, Lavinia obtained a BA in History and Philosophy from Humboldt University in Berlin. In 2021, she completed an MPhil in Early Modern History here in Cambridge. She has held predoctoral fellowships with the Medici Archive and the German Center for Venetian Studies in summer 2023. Her research is generously funded by the Cambridge International Trust. Her contribution is titled Cyprus Powder and Cretan Secrets, Experiences and Notions of Eastern Mediterranean Healing in Early Modern Italy. And last but not least, Marco Nocente is a postdoctoral fellow in carceral geography at the University of Milano Bicocca. His work explores Italian prison landscapes from abolitionist perspective, and his PhD research focuses on the development of prison governmentality and witnessed by an archive of prisons letters. So his current research investigates the continuities across space and time of carceral landscapes. And his contribution is titled Let the Prison Disappear in the Landscape, the Islands of Capraia and Asinara. And please join me in welcoming all of them for this session.
Okay, so thank you so much for having me today. Thank you so much, Giovanna, for inviting me. And yeah, I'm very sorry for now you have to do an early modern talk. In 1589, Crossroads, the Cypriot chaplain of the Greek nation in the Venetian eastern port town of Pula, so Pula, modern-day Pula in Croatia, was tried by the Venetian Inquisition. According to the local Latin bishop, the Cypriot clergyman had taken part in cross-confessional gatherings hosted in the house of the Latin shopkeeper Marcantonio and his Greek wife Calimena. During these gatherings, members of the Latin and Greek clergy had denied the power of the sacraments and had questioned the divine nature of Christ. The inquisitors also extensively questioned Procrus about his healing activities conducted in the Veneto eastern port town of Stignano, modern-day Stinjan, a district of Pula. It soon emerged that, for a long time, the Greek clergyman had been healing the afflicted all across the eastern Mediterranean and the, quote, Paesi dei Turchi, the Ottoman dominions, including Constantinople and his native island of Cyprus. The inquisitors were particularly concerned about Procrus' habit of administering internal remedies, so-called rimedi da bocca, since this was an exclusive prerogative of trained and licensed physicians. In his defense, the Greek clergyman claimed that there were no trained physicians in Ottoman-ruled Greece, and that in the eastern Mediterranean, including his native Cyprus, Greek clergymen had therefore to do all that was in their power to bring some relief to the sick. That sometimes meant engaging in unconventional or unorthodox healing. To this claim, the inquisitors replied that Procrus was living in, quote, Italian-ruled lands, Paesi Italiani, which were very well equipped to take care of the sick. Thus, Procrus had no longer to fear for the health and well-being of his community. Discourses about the lack of medical infrastructure and isolation in the eastern Mediterranean were popular across early modern Italy. As shown by Marina Imi in her study of the system of the Lazzaretti, early modern Italian health officials saw the plague as an omnipresent threat in the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, and the Ottoman Habsburg borderlands. In these, quote from Imi, diseased landscapes, local and Ottoman institutions were often believed to be unfit to control the spread of contagion. This alleged lack of medical infrastructure would also often be instrumentalized as a tool for self-promotion. As shown by Valentina Pogliano, so-called Medici Condotti, Venetian envoy physicians to Istanbul, Alexandria, Cairo and Damascus, stressed in the travel diaries the importance of the role. Hoping for a promotion at the return to Venice, the travel writings described how they had been healing not only the fellow Venetians, but also the local population, who was eager to receive Western treatments and otherwise would have only received insufficient medical attention. Likewise, Catholic missionaries to the Aegean Islands, hoping to promote the cause for the reunification of the Catholic and Greek Orthodox Church, stressed the activities as main health providers. To islands such as Paros in the Cyclades, allegedly, quote, forgotten by Ottoman authorities, Catholic missionaries introduced thaumaturgic objects and several pieces of materia medica, such as Maltese clay, which we will encounter later on. Furthermore, as we have seen for the case of Crossroads in Pola, the alleged lack of Ottoman medical infrastructure was used as an argument to justify the engagement in unorthodox, unconventional, and even medical practices. While similar ideas circulated widely across official records and travel accounts, alternative archival evidence suggests that the early modern Eastern Mediterranean and its islands were instead a highly connected space in which ideas, medical practitioners, and pharmaceutical substances circulated widely and crossed religious, political, and cultural boundaries. Through increased cross-cultural contact, many early modern contemporaries thought of the Aegean archipelago as a pharmaceutical landscape, or rather islandscape, which abounded with medical substances and whose inhabitants could achieve exceptional level of medical expertise. Challenging ideas of isolation, as masterfully done by Ini for the case of the Lazzaretti, I will first argue that health providers and apothecary shops on Eastern Mediterranean islands were part of wider cross-European networks of intellectual exchange and book trade. I will then show that European travellers to Aegean islands perceived the local population as highly skilled in the sourcing and handling of native medical substances. While local authorities attempted to regulate the export of medical ingredients from the Aegean, Eastern Mediterranean agents enabled the wider circulation of sought-after pieces of materia medica. Finally, I will show that some Italian contemporaries ascribed a significant degree of medical know-how to migrant healers from islands such as Crete and Cyprus. For the sake of today's theme, I will mostly draw on examples from Ottoman and Venetian ruled islands such as Crete, Cyprus, and Lemnos, but during our discussion, I'm happy to expand my reflection on medical and pharmaceutical exchanges on the Ottoman and Italian mainland as well. As archival evidence shows, Eastern Mediterranean islands were not places of medical, pharmaceutical, or intellectual isolation. In 1569, the Venetian Inquisition trialed the Cretan physician Emmanuel Marat for the possession of illicit books and the dissemination of Protestant ideas in the Greek archipelago. Like many other trials held across the Venetian Empire, parts of the hearings took place on the island of Candia, modern-day Crete. The trial records shed light onto a common training and career path for health providers in the Eastern Mediterranean. Like many provincial Venetian practitioners from the Stato da Mar, Emmanuel Marat had studied medicine at the University of Padua, where he had befriended several Flemish students and had first engaged in Protestant ideas. Having come back to his native island, he joined a network of trans-imperial Veneto and Ottoman Greek health providers that spun across the entire archipelago. During the trial, a crucial centre for the acquisition of information about Emmanuel's heretic beliefs was the apothecary shop run by the Ottoman Greek Antonio from Rhodes, Maestro Antonio Rodiotto. In Antonio of Rhodes' pharmacy, some of the trial witnesses exchanged information about Emmanuel Marat with the Greek priest Papasiorios Halametanos. According to the priest, Emmanuel's brother Marco was an even more dangerous heretic and deserved to be trialed alongside the main suspect. As shown by Filippo Di Vivo for the case of early modern Venetian pharmacies, apothecary shops functioned as important centres for the circulation of unorthodox ideas, cross-cultural gatherings, and the exchange of news. Faced with intensified scrutiny from state authorities, pharmacies were also crucial resources for gathering information about all sorts of illicit activities. In Crete or Candia, too, just like in Venice, pharmacies were vibrant hubs of intellectual exchanges, cross-cultural and cross-confessional encounters. Furthermore, the Venetian Inquisition in Candia also went on to seize and burn prohibited books from Emmanuel Marat's circle. These included works by Erasmus, writings by the influential Flemish humanist Rodolphe Agricola, and the political thinker Niccolò Machiavelli, as well as copies of the Quran, which you can see here. From Emanuel's personal library, the Inquisition seized and destroyed the Definitiones Multarum Appellationum by Protestant theologian Philip Melanchthon and work by Swiss reformer Theodor Bibliander. The Inquisition noted that several of the works had been annotated by Emanuel's brother Marco and had reached the archipelago thanks to the mediation of a book trader from the Tuscan town of Lucca. Testifying to the cross-cultural reach of the early modern book trading networks, the Marat brothers in Candia also owned a conspicuous amount of works from the Reform Printing Centre of Basel. These included one of the numerous Basel editions of the Cosmographia by Sebastian Münster, the Basel edition of the Homilies of John Chrysostom with the commentary of Reformed theologian Wolfgang Musculus, and most significantly a copy of the Basel Greek Bible. The two also owned books printed by the Venetian-trained German printer Sebastian Ruffius. As the case of Emmanuel Marat shows, health providers in the archipelago were not isolated from mainland intellectual exchanges, but still retained their connections to fellow dissenting practitioners, book traders and printing centres. On the Italian mainland in Italy's early modern Eastern Mediterranean island colonies alike, medical and pharmaceutical networks were crucial for the circulation of news, unorthodox ideas and banned books. As a highly connected space, the Eastern Mediterranean and its islands also played a vital role in the European provisioning of materia medica, medical substances. Many vital medical ingredients to early modern European pharmacopoeia travelled for Asia through Cyprus. Others were directly sourced on the Eastern Mediterranean islands. In 1582, Tuscan Grand Duke Francesco de' Medici was gifted with a travel report by a now anonymous Florentine envoy who travelled to Istanbul. The travel account followed the model of contemporary island choreographies, so-called isolari or island narratives, dedicating a few lines to every major island in the Ionian and Aegean archipelago. The islands were described as singular, self-contained ecologies with peculiar natural regimes, cultural and religious practices. Throughout the report, the author also displayed a remarkable interest in exotic sightings, including the description of a giraffe seen on Zakynthos. The author was also particularly interested in the circulation of substances, drugs and foodstuffs. For example, the travelogue described how lemon juice was regularly shipped from Crete, Cyprus, Syria and Rhodes for the conspicuous lemon sorbet production in Istanbul. When visiting the Ottoman Greek island of Lemnos, which has officially stood under Ottoman jurisdiction from 1479, the author dwelt into an extensive description and praise of the embodied skills and know-how of the local Greek population entrusted with sourcing the island's most prized export, terra lemnia. Terra lemnia, the clay from Lemnos, also known as terra sigillata, was a quintessential ingredient in early modern Eurasian pharmacopoeia. From the Safavid Empire to the Ottoman dominions in the Spanish Atlantic, terra lemnia was essential in producing theriac, a panacea or all-curing wonder drug described by ancient authors whose composition could entail everything between 200 and 350 ingredients. The anonymous traveller meticulously described the know-how and expertise of the local Greek population in sourcing the clay. The substance was said to naturally descend from a local mountain in a stream into a natural basin. On the 6th of August, as part of the celebrations for the Transfiguration of Jesus, the local population would drain the water that had separated from the clay sediments on the bottom of the basin. The clay would then be scooped out in 3 batches. The first batch was the most sought after, considered to be of higher quality than the following ones. This process could only take place, quote, with the help of some people who reside on the island, con l'intervento di persone che risiedono all'isola, since they were the only ones to, quote, have an eye for the required steps, solo per aver occhio a queste azioni. In the global quest for reproducing theriac, early modern contemporaries soon realized, too fast. Oh no, I think that's okay. In the global quest for reproducing Feria, early modern contemporaries soon realized that several ingredients described by ancient authors were either no longer identifiable, had gone extinct, or were becoming increasingly difficult to source. With the Ottoman conquest of the island of Lemnos, Ottoman authorities had sought to put the sourcing of terra lemnia under stricter regulation by enforcing measures of quality control and attempting to establish a monopoly. While terra lemnia had stood under the suspicion of medical authorities as it could be easily diluted or stretched with lesser clays, Ottoman authorities now required the local population to bottle the clay directly on the island before leaving directly on the island. Before leaving Lemnos, the jars of terra lemnia would be closed with a wax seal bearing the seal of the current ruling sultan, thereby ensuring that no lesser ingredient could be added retrospectively. The jars were then directly shipped to the court in Istanbul, from where they were distributed as diplomatic gifts all across Eurasia. Furthermore, the basin used to collect the clay was kept under lock by local Greek clerics. Material evidence, such as the one displayed here, further suggests that travelling terra lemnia, whether genuine or not, could take many more forms. For example, small cylindrical pieces of clay with inscriptions reading terra lemnia and a crescent moon were widely available on the European market. While only scientific analysis may determine the provenance of the clay, the Latin inscription with the crescent moon wanted to suggest authenticity. While most early modern European contemporaries would have encountered terra lemnia in this bead form, the Tuscan travel account did not mention the production of terra lemnia beads on the island. As contemporary records show, by the late 16th century, the Medici court pharmacy was still very much interested in acquiring terra lemnia that had undergone the described procedures of quality control and was being supplied by trustworthy sources linked to the Ottoman court. While certified terra lemnia could be obtained as part of diplomatic exchanges, in fact the Medici received several jars of terra lemnia from the Ottoman court, cross-Mediterranean networks also enabled the unofficial acquisition of authentic terra lemnia. In these networks, Eastern Mediterranean people played a crucial role. In 1553, Giovanni Battista di Ippolito Buondelmonti, a Florentine envoy to Istanbul, sent to the Tuscan Grand Duchess Eleonora di Toledo a provision of terra lemnia. The quality of the substance had been certified by the apothecary of the Florentine nation in Istanbul, Mastro Bernardo Porcellini, weird name, as well as the court physician of the Sultan, Dr. Amon. The Ottoman physician had most likely sourced the medicinal substance from the court pharmacy of the Topkapi Palace. Likewise, in 1608, the Ottoman Greek intermediary Manolis Sideropoulos sent from Istanbul to Grand Duke Ferdinando I de' Medici a thaumaturgic vessel made from real terra lemnia. Outside of the courtly context too, Eastern Mediterranean people presented themselves as traders in authentic Aegean materia medica. This was the case for the converted Levantine Simplices, or an itinerant vendor of medicinal substances, Marcantonio Galeotto from Jerusalem, who sold pieces of rare Eastern Mediterranean materia medica, including, as you can see, terra lemnia, across the streets of Venice. The quest for authenticity also extended to many other pieces of materia medica from the Aegean archipelago. Manuscript Ricardiano 2709 to the preserved at the Biblioteca Ricardiana in Florence recorded the numerous Florentine attempts at reproducing ancient Theriac. In the making of Theriac, Florentine apothecaries meticulously recorded which Aegean ingredient they had been able to source and which had to be replaced. In 1553, the apothecaries of the Hospital of Santa Maria Nuova recorded how they had been able to acquire authentic aspalathus, aspalato vero, a plant from the Ottoman island of Rhodes, as well as real therebinge, or cyproterpentine from Cyprus. The precious aspalathus from Rhodes had been acquired through the help of Giambattista Tedaldi, a prominent botanist who had travelled extensively across Eastern Europe, including Poland and Russia, and had cross-Mediterranean networks of his own. Thanks to such cross-Mediterranean informants and mediators, Tedaldi was able to dedicate much of his life work to the study of aspalathus from Rhodes. When it came to sourcing real terralemnia, the hospital had oops, what is it? Okay, when it came to sourcing real terralemnia, the hospital had far less luck and had to resort to Maltese clay, a popular substitute. Through the reception of ancient tribal authors and botanists, as well as increased cross-cultural contact and encounters, some early modern practitioners came to think the Aegean archipelago as a pharmaceutical islandscape in which every island, with its own peculiar ecological regime, contributed an essential ingredients to the making of all-curing wonder drugs. Some of these island ecologies were themselves believed to have healing properties, such as, for example, Nissyros in the Dodecanese, with its thaumaturgic thermal waters and sulfuric vapours. European missionaries and travel accounts reported about the exceptional life expectancy of the island's inhabitants. A short stay on Nissyros could allegedly also restore every traveller's health. The genuine provenance of specific substances from therapeutic Aegean islands could thus also testify to their quality and medical effectiveness. Despite several attempts at controlling exports, as has been shown, materia medica from Aegean islands was constantly on the move. Eastern Mediterranean intermediaries, migrants and go-betweens played a crucial role in calming European anxieties about the authenticity and provenance of these Aegean substances. I'm going to come to my final point. Finally, while some European contemporaries lamented the alleged lack of medical provisions and health institutions in the Eastern Mediterranean, some others also came to highly appreciate the medical skills and know-how of Eastern Mediterranean migrants. In early modern Italy, migrants from islands such as Crete and Cyprus could often rebuild their life by claiming to have privileged access to medical secrets or exclusive medical recipes from the native islands. This was the case, for example, for Maddalena Stellopula, a Greek woman from Crete who had been living in Venice for the past 40 years. Maddalena and her husband Ottavio, a Genoese surgeon, were tried for witchcraft by the Venetian Inquisition in 1610. Participating in contemporary learned discourses about the making of natural remedies, Maddalena claimed that she possessed several, quote, natural secrets, segregate naturali, which her Greek father had passed down to her. She claimed that her, quote, secrets from Candia could only cure people affected by natural diseases and had no powers over demonic afflictions. Likewise, in 1639, the migrant healer Angela Rifiletti, known as La Turca from Ottoman-ruled Cyprus, was accused of witchcraft by the Venetian Inquisition. Like Maddalena, the Ottoman Greek Angela Turca claimed to have been healing people not through magic, but thanks to, quote, natural secrets that she had obtained from a monk in Candia. Just like Maddalena, Angela claimed that her remedies were entirely natural, merely consisting of a compound oil made from incense, juniper, sage and roses. Throughout the 16th century, many more Ottoman and Bantu Greek healers from Eastern Mediterranean islands were tried for alleged witchcraft while healing their patients with so-called secrets from Candia or secrets from Cyprus. While similar trial records attest to the intensified scrutiny faced by foreign migrant healers, especially when they were women, some clues also attest to the high degree of success and appreciation enjoyed by these practitioners. For example, Maddalena from Candia had enjoyed the status of a licensed practitioner before having her license revoked after a quarrel with the Venetian Health Board. To safeguard her highly successful business, she had resorted to having her Italian husband, the Genoese surgeon Ottavio De Rossi, acquire a license in her place. During the trial, it soon emerged that many of the surgeon's healing activities had actually been conducted by Maddalena. One of the witnesses even claimed that Ottavio, quote, doesn't know anything about medicine, and that Maddalena would often admit to, quote, being the one who tells him what to do. The high degree of financial success enjoyed by the practitioner couple had even enabled Maddalena to assemble a state-of-the-art collection of medical books. Likewise, Angela Rifiletti La Turca from Cyprus achieved a high degree of financial success. She conducted her healing activities by reaching her patient's home on board of a gondola, the most expensive and visible mode of transportation in Venice. Allegedly, quote, all dressed in the finest silks and making a very solemn entry. She was also escorted by an entourage consisting of at least 2 assistants. Amongst her clients, she counted several members of apothecary's family, proving that a relationship of trust had at some point existed between the Cypriot healer and these official health providers. Furthermore, additional evidence from manuscript recipe collections attests to the high degree of medical authority, expertise and trustworthiness ascribed to these migrant practitioners. The same Eastern Mediterranean female healers whose natural secrets stood under the scrutiny of the Inquisition could also be perceived and quoted by some other contemporaries as highly original experts in remedy making and sources of vernacular knowledge. For example, the 17th century Welcome Manuscript 51 featured a recipe for pink sugar solution ascribed to the Signora Orense from Cyprus, Orense Cipriota. Likewise, Welcome Manuscript 660, most likely compiled by Venetian author, featured a recipe for a, quote, wondrous face cream which the compiler had obtained from a Greek woman, a Greca. As extensively shown by historians working on early modern recipe collections, the compilers of these vernacular books, of which most, at least for the Italian case, were learned upper-class men, often ascribed a high degree of medical expertise to the authors of similar recipes. Through meticulous ascriptions, these compilers preserved and treasured the medical knowledge and achievements of these migrant remedy makers for posterity. And now I come to my conclusion. Printed books of artisanal secrets too, such as the fictive author Alessio Piemontese's De Segreti, ascribed a high degree of medical expertise to the inhabitants of Eastern Mediterranean islands. Especially Cypriot people were believed to have greatly contributed to developing cosmetical recipes, amongst others recipes for making polvere di cipri, cypress powder, today known as setting powder or cipria in Italian. According to Piemontese, the inhabitants of Cyprus had perfected the art of making so-called butri, small cylindrical pieces of dried dung soaked with scented substances such as rose water. The pieces of imported dung would be sold widely across Venice, where they were crushed to make setting powders and other scented products. Recipes for so-called cypress powder travelled from collection to collection and repeatedly crossed the divide between printed and manuscript medium. In manuscript recipe books, cypress powder soon became synonymous for a pleasantly smelling either red, light beige or white setting powder that combined several costly pharmaceutical substances from the Eastern Mediterranean and broader Levant. Other types of portable beauty products too, such as the so-called pizzette di Levante. Sorry, I skipped this one. So this is polvere di cipri, and that's what I was referring to just now. Other types of portable beauty products, such as the pizzette di Levante, pieces of cloth soaked in red liquid blush, were ascribed to Eastern Mediterranean inventors. As I hope to have convincingly shown, rather than an isolated and diseased geography, some early modern contemporaries came to perceive and experience the Eastern Mediterranean and its islands as a highly connected space in which ideas, pharmaceutical substances, practitioners and techniques were constantly on the move. Well, for some contemporaries, this would have not made up for the lack of medical institutions such as faculties, guilds and colleges of physicians and apothecaries. Thanks to increasing contact and cohabitation, the Eastern Mediterranean islandscape could be perceived as a repository of vernacular forms of medical, botanical and pharmaceutical knowledge. Thank you.
I hope it's working. Okay, so first of all, thank you everybody to organize this session, this conference. I'm Marco, you already presented me. So today we will speak about the presentation titled Let the Prison Disappear into the Landscape, the island of Capraia and Asinara. To turn is this one, right? Okay, perfect. Okay, so this presentation has a frame, slow violence and the flickering landscape. When I speak slow slow violence, I mean a violence that occurs gradually and invisibly, a violence that is delayed, of delayed destruction, which is dispersed in time and space, and is insidious, is a violence that is generally perceived not as a violence. it's a violence that you can see in many elements of the landscape. So we can see, it's interesting to see how the flickering landscape let us show something about this low violence. And in this case, we will speak about the erosion of the carceral landscape that can be seen in the two islands that I'm going to present. Here, here we have just one element of the carceral landscape of the island of Capraia, where you can see the terrace where wine was produced, which is now eroding, if not for the few wineries which are retaking the space, but just in a few small terraces of the island. Sorry. Okay, so here you can see the two islands. In the north of Corse, you can see the Capraia, and in the south, Asinara. Capraia is, as you can see, is also part of the Toscan archipelagos, and Asinara is very close to Sardinia, really a few kilometers. What I want to present here is how islands are in the peripheral zone of the nation, but in the same time they are the heart of the sovereign project. So these are two examples that will show this. There are also two examples of state territorialization project, a re-territorialization project, and also they were part of the nation building of Italy. And then later I will show you the specificity of the two islands. But also they are part of carceral archipelagos, which is a concept that comes from Foucault, which can be seen in a both metaphorical and a material sense. Metaphorical in the sense that it shows the prison continuity, so how the prison, the spaces within this island had a continuity with imprisonment. For instance, Asinara was a lazaretto and then became a prison camp and then became a prison, and Capraia was a convent and then became a prison camp and then a prison again. And anyway, they're also part of a proper carceral archipelagos. For instance, Capraia, as I told you, is part of the Toscan prison archipelagos, in which since the end of the last century there was 4 prisons. Porto Azzurro, Capraia, Pianosa and Isola della Gorgona, but also were part of a system of prison. Capraia, for instance, was part of the reward prisons. So the Italian prison system have several prisons. There are the supermax prison, the ordinary prison, let's say, but also prison that was giving, in which you could leave a detention which was more soft, let's say. So these two islands are also an example of a top-down imposition of state economic and security prison policies. It's a classic also of many peripheral zones in which the state decides to put a center or something like a prison, or maybe a factory, a manufacturer, a big center for manufacturing, in which the state try to save, but also create dependency from the island to dependency for the community which was living in the island. This was the case of Capraia, in which before becoming a prison it was dependent from a tobacco factory. And then after the closure of the factory, it became after a while a prison. But how it became a factory, how it became a prison is also interesting, because it's an example of let's say a space of exception. Because in 1863, all along the unification of Italy, it was the island in which deported brigands were sent. So thousands of brigands were sent for 10 years in this island. And this happening in this building that you can see on the right side, in which they was kind of living in a sort of open-air prison, and they were based here. And after 10 years, this exemption normalized within a proper prison, and again this building became the main central of the section of the prison that was all around the island. So here is interesting to see what I said before, the carceral continuity, so how the prison building have also a different function in the history, but kept always something that was related to prison. In the beginning this was a church and a convent, in which of course solitary confinement was a thing, was quite an element of this building, and then it became a prison. But also Capraia, as I said before, it was an experimental ground for policy, because here you could see the unicity of the open-air prison. There were really few cases in Italy. One of those was also Asinara, because there was a penal colony. It's what we in the beginning was called penal colony and then became open-air workhouse. And there are just few examples of this in Italy. Now there is just one left open, which is Isola della Gorgona, and is the only one in Europe. Anyway, it's an experimental ground for policy, because it means that prisoner could work in open air. They were sleeping, of course, in the rest of the penal colony, but there was also several levels of security. For instance, there were prisoners who was not neither living in the sections of the penal colony, but they was living in proper houses, like solitary, but working in the town and without having the control of the guards that was checking their activity. It is also an example of reterritorialization, and a special kind, a unique kind of this, because here we have the coexistence of prison officials and locals, because since the prison was based, prison staff was sent to the island. The community, differently to Asinara, which we will see in the next slides, the community stayed in Capraia. An average of 300 people always lived in the island with the working prisoner and the officials, not without conflict, of course. The whole island was, all the jobs, for instance, was made by the prisoners, so most of the house was built and maintained by the prisoners. And in the island it was created as a kind of a circular economy based on, of course, forced labor, which give good prices for the community. In 1986 the prison closes. After 10 years the part of the island becomes a national park, and in 2010 there was this concession of the prison building to the civilian use. This is quite interesting because we can see from 1986 to 2010, so a long time in which these buildings were completely abandoned. So here are the pictures of these days. This is how you can find the penal colony. How you can see how the penal colony is eroded by the Mediterranean scrub. Today, just few of these buildings are kept renewed partially, not externally actually, just internally for safety reasons, and we have 3 wineries, a dairy and a holiday farm. Most of the things that was made by the colony, by the forced labor, where you can see that now how it's not sustainable to have such a big space like terraces and fields like before when there was the penal colony. And here you can see also the witness of a carceral landscape that is not really where the touristic industry, which is now changing the vocation of the island, is not really considering that. So the other case I want to present is Asinara Island. Again, here is an example of a top-down imposition of state policies. It born in 1885, again close to the unification of Italy. But this is an island in which the process of reterritorialization was completely different, because they make the island as a tabula rasa. So here, the 400 people who was living, they was evacuated in the close Stintino town, and this was an island which belonged to Sardinia, but actually was a state island, because since 1885 we have a free ministry in the same island in 50 kilometers square. we had the Ministry of the Health Ministry, the Interior Ministry, because there was the prison, the penal colony, and there was the Navy, so the Army. It is an example of an island which was involved by global influence, such as war, colonization, colonialism, and the politics of the against the international crime. It was speaking about the prison continuities. There are buildings which was Lazzaretto, which then become quarantine center. But also there are. It is an example of post-military and post-carceral landscape. So it is quite a intertwined. There are intertwined landscape which are living together. Also here, which is a typical example of what is happening to this former prison island, in 2002 it became a national park. But what I want to present about Asinara are three periods. So the first one is how Asinara is a post-prison and post-military and post-sanitary landscape in the same time, when during the First World War 23,000 Austro-Hungarian soldiers were sent to Asinara because of the spread of typhus, cholera, tuberculosis and nephritis. Actually, these prisoners had to be sent to Europe as forced labor, but what happened was that after the Serbian War in Albania, when before the boat was coming to take them, the illness spread. So those illness spread, and the place where they decide to send the soldier was Asinara. Asinara now in this moment became a sort of a filter for this forced labor that for 3 years host these prisoners in a place, in a space which was not at all sustainable for 23,000 prisoners. The maximum capacity was 800. So here we can see an example of a case of a prison camp organized by, I don't know if you are used to biopolitics lexicon, led by necropolitics. So all the daily life were organized by these rules. We had an average in the worst period in the height of the epidemic of 100 deaths for a day. So it's quite an impressive period that now has just few witnesses, like the chapel of the Austro-Hungarian prisoners, the cemetery, and actually those monuments generally are used much more to say how in some sense the army treat the prisoners well, because they give them the space for praying and the place for a right burying, but it's much more different, and actually probably was because of the condition in which they was living in the island that made the illness spread more. So it's much more critical, the history of this this moment, this historical period. And then Asinara was also witnessing the colonization. It was still again during after the Second Ethiopian War between Italy and the Ethiopian. Sorry, I lost the page. Okay, what happened is was that 500 dignitaries, so the upper class of the Ethiopian empire, were sent to Italy, were sent specifically to Asinara, where the island became again as a sort of a filter used to invisibilize these colonized people. What I mean about this invisibilization is that Asinara, as I said before, was part of a system of island of the empire, what was an empire in that years, in which there were many islands. For instance, for those who was rebel against the fascism, who want to take Addis Ababa. Those people were oppositioners were sent to the closest island of Nokra, which was in the actual Eritrea, for instance. But the choice of taking the prisoners especially the upper class prisoners, to Asinara was a strategy of invisibilization, because internally there was not actually in the Italian nation. On the same, they were considered for the Italians as a prisoner, but in the same time, from an external point of view, which was quite complicated, because this historical period was just before the Second World War, and there was also issue between Italy and UK in that period about Ethiopian. From an external point of view, it was a perfect solution to show how, also you can see it in the picture, the prisoners were treated in a good way, and so to show a different portrait of the imprisonment. Asinara again was a protagonist of another historical period, which is actually there are two historical periods when in the parallel, of course, of being a penal colony, so an open-air workhouse, it was also a maximum security prison. But it was not just a maximum security prison, but was the space of experimentation of the maximum security prison for two different times. First, to fight against the armed struggle of movements such as armed groups such as the Red Brigades, the Brigate Rosse, and also from 1992 against the mafia phenomenon. In these two different periods, we can see the island used as a test site to try a policy of imprisonment that in the same period when they were tested in Italy, they were tested also in the United States, such as in 1992 with the Supermax, and in Italy it's called 41 bis. But here in Asinara and Pianosa were the two islands in which 41 bis, for instance, was tested and then implemented in the rest of Italy. Here you can also see a picture of a protester, if I could remember, during the Settimana Rossa, the Red Week, let's say, in which it is written Asinara Caienna Italiana, which reminds the term Cayenne, which is the island of the devil, the island of Papillon of the French Guiana, just for curiosity. To conclude, those two prison islands closes mainly for a lot of other prison island for economic reason. Generally, if a prison closes, just because of economic reason, not because they think that was too much or too much harsh or any other reasons. Generally, one of the main issue why these prison closes are like the supply of water, supply of food, which mean a lot of a huge cost for the administration to deal with. And what I try to present in this presentation is how this island of the Mediterranean have fulfilled various functions related to military activities. They become forts, they are detention center, deportation center, and used for the exile. All of them present certain historical continuity between the function that I just said, albeit changing and blurring between internal and external security. We saw the colonization with the intertwining of war, of colonialism, the detention logics of mobility and immobility. So we can see how Mediterranean was an historical space of circulation of people dependent on global and national process. Asinara and Capraia also represent how the prison is still a landscaping agent, but is disappearing, replaced by new ecotourist vocation of this island. The fact of having a century prison building each island guarantees a soft environmental impact on the island that now is reinvesting just because of this reason, also because of this reason, their identity on this condition, because the ecology was preserved by the prison, which was not where there were not so many buildings, where the ecology of the island is unique from this in this sense, and now it can invest again in slow tourism, for instance. So at the same time, this flickering landscape reveals a progressive amnesia, so of the collective memory of the history of this island, which which portray a state violence and the development of the state sovereignty through the history, which is witnessed just by the ruined building left. We can see also how, and this is a concept that I always like because I'm coming from carceral geography and now I move also on island studies, this idea of the lure of island, of the fascination of island, which it's quite interesting because it's the same lure of island and the fascination of island which has the state sovereignty to develop strategies to this prison island. So I think is an interesting connection. And again, landscape of mourning and remembrance for the past can create a collective memory that can be useful in the present. So also that's why I'm trying to bring all of this argument today, because this interplay of remembrance, forgetting, connecting to these sites often is pay the history of being contextualized in a political context that pretend to show just some part of the history and not the criticalities that this space actually lived. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. This was were all very compelling. I'll try to provide a brief comment, but I was so busy taking notes because everything was so interesting that I don't know if I can share something that makes sense. But I'll try, so excuse me if I don't have a thread through my thoughts. First of all, I would like to propose a slight change to the title of the session, so proposing like as immaterialities with the in of immobilities.
That was planned, but there were too many parentheses.
Oh yeah, I agree completely. It looks better, but I think
it makes sense.
Because I mean, we spoke about objects, architecture, places, landscape, but they signify something much more important. That is memory and identity, cultural heritage. National identity, display of power and violence. I see the importance of violence in this context in shaping specific elements that are linked to identity and memory, and this could be material and immaterial, as we've seen today. And we also see that this memory, especially in this last presentation, memory and collective memory is always under threat. So this is one of my first thoughts about this session. And then I wanted to think about, given also my proposed change of titles of immaterialities, materialities, and then immobilities and mobilities, I wanted to think about dichotomies. But to borrow an example from Elena's presentation, I want to not only use the right eye or the left eye, but try to use both at the same time. It's something that I try to do also in my research, and I think the islands are a very apt topic for this. So we explore dichotomies, disjunctures, but also conjunctures in these talks. We talked about localities, but also continental and wider networks at the same time. I was very struck how these appear in all these three very different presentations. And I'm sorry if I'm saying something obvious, but it's what I found very interesting. And I'm very fascinated by this role of islands in connecting past and present, but also in representing something so distinctive that is always recognized from our sides, like as we have seen from Lavinia's presentation, as this production of medical knowledge and medical materia medica as something that was seen as quite distinctive in general. So yeah, I think these are my thoughts, and I would like maybe to invite the speakers if they think that their presentation is more balanced with one right eye or the left eye, to try, maybe if they want to provide a comment in switching their point of view. And also I forgot to mention also gender, and I assume that in this case gender is mostly male in the case of the last speaker. But also, yeah, there is a way also of like thinking about gender in the space of islands. Sorry if I'm a bit all over the place, but yeah, thank you.
Okay.
We are ready to start, I guess, the third and final session of today's symposium, which is going to revolve around forced immobilities, as you know, and as a case of forced mobility, we will have to leave the room a bit sooner than expected, so I will be particularly strict in monitoring the time, but don't worry and don't hate me. I will first introduce the speakers. There has been a change in the program, so we're going to have Marta's papers first, and then it will be followed by Nicola Montagna's paper, who is joining online. Then we have questions for Nicola, who will then have to leave, and then we'll get to Giovanna's paper and have the shared broader Q&A session. So let me introduce our speakers. The first one, Mate Aknich, who is Assistant Professor in Development Studies at the Center of Development Studies in the Department of Politics and International Studies here at Cambridge. She is an anthropologist working on migration and mobility. Her research centers around the lived experiences, governance and economies of migration, with a focus on migrants' journeys, particularly to and through Libya, the Mediterranean, and Europe. Marte has conducted multi-sited ethnographic fieldwork with migrants in Libya and in Malta. Her book, Mobility, Economies in Europe's Borderlands, Migrants' Journeys Through Libya and the Mediterranean, was published with Cambridge University Press in 2023. Before starting at the University of Cambridge, Marte was a fellow by examination in anthropology, JRF at Magdalen College, University of Oxford, and previously also a Wiener Anspach postdoctoral fellow in anthropology at the Laboratoire d'Anthropologie des Mondes Contemporains, Université Libre de Bruxelles in Brussels, Belgium. Sorry for my German, French, and other languages. Then our second speaker is going to be Nicola Montagna, who is an associate professor in criminology and sociology at the University of Salerno and received his PhD from Middlesex University in London, where he did research and taught for 20 years. He has extensive research experience in social movements, urban conflicts, international migration, borders and migration policy, and has published in several leading international journals, including Sociology, Ethnicities, Ethnic and Migrant Studies, Sociological Review, Citizenship Studies, and so on. He has recently worked on migration flows and policies in the Mediterranean, and he collaborates with the research center ISMO. And finally, we will have Giovanna Di Matteo. Let me thank her once again for putting this together so beautifully and for being such a positive presence this term in Cambridge. Giovanna, as many of us know, holds an inter-university PhD in geography obtained from the University of Padova, Ca' Foscari, University of Venice, and University of Verona, with a project entitled Migrants Support Volunteer Tourism in Border Islands, Space and Memory in Lampedusa, Italy, and Lesbos, Greece. She is currently a research fellow at the Gran Sasso Science Institute, where she is carrying out a project on inner areas and peripheral areas in Italy and forced migration. Her research activity to date encompasses migration studies, mobility studies, island studies, and additional research interests of Giovanna's include the geography of tourism, critical tourism studies, landscape studies, and heritage studies. Yeah,
okay, wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm a bit in the dark, in the shade, but unfortunately, it's the room, which is a little bit dark. But anyway, well, first of all, thanks. I would like to thank Giovanna for inviting me to this symposium. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend what you did in the morning, and I could connect on only now. And thank you all for being there and for listening to me. And my presentation is about another form of stuckness, let's say, to use what the concept and the term just used by Marta, and it's about the use of quarantine ships during the COVID-19 pandemic by the Italian government as part of EU institution, as a member state of the European Union. Let's start first of all by saying what these quarantine ships were, because actually they were used during the pandemic. The first time they were used was in April 2020 as a sort of kind of experiment to confine, let's say, to quarantine migrants, newly arrived migrants by boat, and they were used until June 2022, the beginning, end of May 2022, beginning of June 2022. They were it started, as I said, as a sort of experiment in spring 2020, only 1 or 2 until June 2020 quarantine ships were used to quarantine migrants. Then they became, by the end of the summer 2020, a small kind of fleet, which again was used until June 2022. They were chartered by the Italian shipping company Grandi Navi Veloci, which is a private company mainly involved in carrying people from mainland to Italian islands and also to Tunisia, and run by the Italian Red Cross for health and logistic services. They were more outside critical landing areas, including Lampedusa, for example, but also in Pozzallo. Quarantine ships were an alternative to quarantine in quarantine migrants in reception centers on mainland. The official aim of these quarantine ships were to protect the health of local community and immigrants. This is how they were presented by the Italian government to explain and to justify mostly the cost of this instrument. Then we can find, well, on the basis of the research I did and on the basis of the interviews I carried out, we could see them as a response to, or we could see them as a response to a protest of local communities against the use of a reception center to quarantine arriving migrants. This paper is based on 20 interviews with lawyers and practitioners and activists I carried out between April 2020 and let's say autumn of the same year. And basically I was interested, basically started as a small project. I was, as everybody at the time, I was in lockdown. I was preparing my teaching and trying to to organize my life in a kind of lockdown, kind of very strict lockdown situation. And it's based on a project, self-funded project, which was moved from my interest in understanding more about COVID-19 related lockdown measures on migrants, their rights, their lives, and their mobility. The aim of this small project was mostly, mainly to understand how this measure impacted on migrants, and then while I started doing some interviews, this measure also was initiated by the Italian government, and then therefore, I moved to a more focused topic, which was to interrogate the impact of COVID-19 on mobility of undocumented migrants and whether a measure which was presented as a way to protect the health of local communities and the safeguard of migrants' health was on the opposite, an instrument of immobilization and confinement. I must say that basically all these interviews were carried out remotely. I couldn't go because of the time frame. I couldn't really, and because of clearly, because these interviews were carried out during the most severe measures of lockdown. I couldn't go where these ships were moored. So this project was based on interviews with key informants, and this is clearly a big limitation, a huge limitation to my research. I couldn't go there where these ships were moored, and I couldn't interview migrants who were basically locked in and confined in these ships. The context, as you remember, generally speaking, was a context of very strict but also differentiated lockdown measures, particularly regarding international mobility. I must say that while Italians or other people, or even other people, obviously had to follow some strict lockdown measures. None of them had to be confined in closed spaces like arriving migrants. And it was a context of racialization of a virus in language. For example, we remember how it was called, the Chinese virus, which was a term used by politicians and media, and it was also characterized by some attacks on migrants and people from the Far East that took place in different countries, including Italy. It was also a context in which the arrival of migrants was used by far-right, right-wing, anti-immigration parties to create a sort of narrative that opposed both migrants' arrivals as an example of freedom of movement and the strict lockdown regulation that Italians were forced to follow. In terms of because obviously on the basis of these interviews, I wrote a couple of articles, and also based my project on part of my project on a theoretical framework which is based on the bordering, securitization, and cremigration nexus. Just a few words to clarify what I mean with these three concepts. Well, first of all, bordering, which designates social and spatial forms of delimitations that take place at several levels and in a variety of contexts, within, outside, and along official state borders, aiming to delineate foreigners' access to citizenship and membership, and to demarcate categories of people so as to incorporate some and exclude others in a spatial social order. Bordering is more than just a physical delimitation of space. There's now quite an important, relevant debate of bordering measures, which again don't really or don't just involve the physical or spatial delimitation of space. It's clearly the physical demarcation of territory is still important, but bordering and bordering measures can be and are now applied at different levels, particularly at cultural level, symbolic level, organizational level, and so on. And this idea of bordering, of multiplication of borders, in a way is inspired by, or at least to a certain extent, by what French philosopher Etienne Balibar wrote a few years ago. Basically, when he said that borders have been multiplied and exist wherever the movement of information, people and things is happening and is controlled. So bordering is this concept is related to the multiplication and of border. But also my theoretical framework and which I try to follow also is related to our intertwined concepts with the ones of securitization and migration. By securitization, usually the literature refers to a way of dealing with migration as a threat that needs to be addressed with a variety of security measures, including border surveillance technology, walls and armored fences, carry sanctions, confinement and detention of undocumented migrants and rejected asylum seekers. This idea of securitization of borders and securitization of bordering measures is also linked to what some recent literature calls and defines migration, which is used to identify the merging of criminal law and migration law that involves punitive measures against migrants who cross borders without documents, and more generally those individuals accused of facilitating irregular migration. Migration, to me and to other scholars, in this case refer to the process of migration rather than the criminalization of migrants, which are obviously two ways of regulating migration, but which are quite different from each other, because migration refers to a reflection on coercive tools to which non-members are subjected and how these tools can be used to recreate borders in an increasingly open world. The criminalization of migration, borders and bordering practices, detention and deportation as responses to the perceived disrupted aspects of mobility of people. Here I quote a scholar who's working on migration as an increasing policy measure used by governments across the globe, not just Western or European governments, but also in the global South. Migration is becoming a common practice. So the focus of my presentation is clearly quarantine ships as a form of confinement, as a form of as a bordering, definitely a bordering measure. And they were started, let's say, they were initiated by two complementary decrees, which decrees which were issued by the Italian government in April 2020. The first one, very controversial, and at the time was contested and challenged by several NGOs and activists. The first one basically said that for the entire duration of national health emergency deriving from spread of the COVID-19 virus, Italian ports do not meet the necessary requirements for the classification and definition of place of safety for rescue cases. So basically, Italy, because of the and Italian ports, because of this decree, was no longer a place of safety, which meant that arriving migrants had to and the boats and the ships that involved in search and rescue missions had to go elsewhere in order to disembark rescued migrants. However, few days after, the government issued another, as I said, complementary decree, where basically put the basis for the quarantine ships. And in this decree, we can read that with reference to people rescued at sea and for whom it's not possible to indicate the place of safety, the implementing body, in compliance with the protocol shared with the Ministry of Health, can use ships to carry out the period of health surveillance. With regard to migrants arriving on the national territory independently, so basically with their own boats. At that time, we could see a kind of important number of people arriving independently, particularly from Tunisia. The implementing body identifies, after consulting the competent regions and local health authorities through the competent prefectures, other areas or structures to be used as accommodation for period of health surveillance. So basically, our places, our reception centers in the mainland. However, basically, the decree says, in the event that it's not possible to identify the aforementioned structures on their territory, the implementing body arranges for the accommodation of migrants for the purposes of fiduciary and quarantine isolation also on the aforementioned ships. So this decree says that those who are saved rescued by search and rescue missions will be quarantined on the ships implemented by the Ministry of Health. The others will be quarantined in reception centers. However, if, and it was the case at the time of Italy, if there's no place in reception centers, they will also be quarantined in these ships. In the end, all those who arrived by boat during the COVID-19 were quarantined in these ships. We can frame these ships as a sort of humanitarian confining. Here I use the idea of humanitarianism and humanitarian in a kind of critical way. I refer to the work of Didier Fassin, who calls humanitarianism and identifies humanitarianism as the third pillar of contemporary governmentality, the other two being the economy and policing. And while combining in critical sense, as said before, because while combining humanitarian principles such as safeguarding life and alleviating suffering, these interventions are not without and were not without humanitarian interventions are not without ambiguity. In bringing relief to suffering people, in fact, humanitarianism can also reproduce inequality and subordination. As Nick Dines writes, for example, humanitarian reason and its actors between genuinely motivated might participate in confinement, turning humanitarianism into a smoke screen. So humanitarianism can be motivated by genuine reasons, but also by, as it involves also some sort of ambiguities that can be found. And my view and what I try to and wrote in my articles, in my view, involve these quarantine ships. As a humanitarian intervention, because as it was presented as a humanitarian intervention, clearly it could rely on NGOs and other actors, and particularly the quarantine ships involved the use, let's say, of Italian Red Cross to organize a number of logistic and a number of our services and our activities, including health activities, social and psychological support for migrants and volunteers. Clearly, the logistics of quarantine people and legal assistance on board of these ships. The involvement of the Italian Red Cross was, due to the main reason was because the Italian Red Cross is basically the most important and the most rooted NGO, let's say, organization in Italy, and I think in several other countries. In Italy, for example, the Italian Red Cross can count on nearly 150,000 volunteers. It was already used in our important emergencies, in our sort of humanitarian activities with migrants, including, for example, the management of hotspots. The Italian Red Cross has a huge reputation in humanitarian interventions, as I said, but also of privileging government demands over protecting migrants. A few years ago, Amnesty International, for example, published a report on violence and police violence and the mistreatment of migrants in hotspot centers, in hotspot centers, and which were basically run and managed by the Italian Red Cross. I'm now going to talk about how these quarantine ships were used. As I said before, clearly I rely mostly on what Red Cross volunteers told me during the interviews I carried out with some of them, and what our practitioners and our key informants told me during these interviews. First of all, I must say that people who were involved in volunteering on these quarantine ships. They were all Red Cross volunteers, but most of them were, went there with no training, and although each ship hosted between, let's say, 600 and 700 people, many of them coming straight directly from Libya, others coming from Tunisia, which were at the time the most important places of departures. So many of the migrants hosted in these ships were coming from a situation of violence and vulnerability. On these ships were very few professional figures, and none of them, or very few of them, had some training before boarding. Moreover, as I could really listen to from what they told me, my participants, my interviewees, knew very little about quarantine ships and about their use. For example, Marco, who's a Red Cross volunteer, told me that I knew nothing about quarantine ships and had never heard of them before that message, the message that he received a few days before boarding by a Red Cross manager. And if ends his interview by saying they promised some training, but it never came. And another one, Marta, I forgot to write the name, she told me during the interview, I sent in my CV because she wanted to volunteer for the Red Cross, and particularly for this kind of experience. I sent in my CV, got called back, and in no time I was on board. It was easy. I had experience in emergencies, but no one asked me what kind of work I had done previously. So there was a sort of improvisation in recruiting volunteers, the volunteers who had to who were going to board on quarantine ships. Many during the period they were volunteering. They were involved in a sort of multitasking activities. Everyone, including the most professional figures, had to do everything depending on what was needed. Again, this is Marta. Another one said we did everything. I had to take care of all the needs they might have, from toothache to requests for food or blankets. And finally, they also were involved in bordering, in real bordering activities. And again, Alessandro that said that every day, hours and hours of course with the Ministry of the Interior to see that all the migrants were registered, and then the same thing with the disembarkation, check out for all the people, and this is what we really had to do. So, these multitasking volunteering involved providing, let's say, some sort of psychological support, providing logistic support, but also providing securitization and bordering activities. Yes.
Chiudere, altrimenti non ce la facciamo con I tempi. Okay?
All right. Okay. So I just well, I mean, I have few more things to say, but basically,
I'm sorry.
no, yeah, it's okay. I just can conclude with a few discussion points, a few kind of questions, and the first one, were quarantine ships an exception or the norm? And my understanding and what I understood from my interviews is that, and from what we can see now, for example, in the UK, quarantine ships were both an exception because clearly they started to deal with an emergency, a pandemic emergency, but at the same time, they were also a norm, another form of bordering, another form of migrant confinement, and somehow migrant detention. Another discussion point is that they were a further confining and bordering measure or a humanitarian intervention. And again, I must say that they were both. A confining measure because they served to block and stop migrants' mobility, although for a period of time which lasted between 14 and 28 days, but they were also a humanitarian intervention. I must say that some participants, even activists, told me that as a form of confinement was better than our place. It was better, obviously, than hotspot, but also was better than some reception centers. Another final point is about how this measure combined the invisibilization of migrants' bodies, because very little debate was, they involved very little debate among the general public, among NGOs. Well, some of them mobilized, but just in Sicily, very little people knew very little about this. But also, they were a sort of a spectacularization of the border. They were a measure, a visible measure that the government was taking care of Italian and therefore European Union borders. And to conclude, really, they responded in a new way for the European Union to the logic of temporary immobilization. And I say temporary as immobilization because this was actually what how they were used, a sort of immobilization measure to filter arriving migrants. Thank you very much. I conclude here.
So, as you can understand by now, I've invited people here just to prepare my own speech. I'm kidding. As I kind of mentioned during my question, my presentation is going to be about the connections, or at least more than the connections, the continuities and discontinuities between the geographical objects, island and ship. So I just want to start locating us, positioning us in the Mediterranean. As you can see, there is one little point there that it's showing where Lampedusa is positioned in the sea, and that's where my work started on migration. So that's where also I want to start my presentation today, connecting again the space of the island used as detention. De facto detention space on the island and the COVID-19 pandemic quarantine ship that we already heard a lot about, used by the Italian government between 2020 and 2022. So islands, as by now you have understood, even because Marco's presentation before kind of introduced the topic as well, have been used very often as spaces of detention, both historically and at present, and their relative peripherality and their clear boundaries are quite central to the exercise of sovereign power and allow national, supranational apparatus to either exacerbate the visibility of these spaces or to reduce it, making it liminal or invisible. So examples can be found really through Italian histories. Just, we see here Santo Stefano. I choose this because connects also to what we were saying before, the panopticon, being able to see the island, and in this case the carcella space was quite clear through this image. So again, there are many examples, and I'm not going to go into that, but I want to link these historical examples to the fact that also as islands have played fundamental role in being spaces of exclusion, marginalization, detention for disposable or undesirable, dangerous people, the same way ships have been used in a very similar manner with very similar functions over history and at present, as we can see. So both islands and the ship are kind of defined by this natural, apparently clear and defined boundaries, and I say apparent because I think that it's much more complex than that, which can be by will of power, let's say, turned into isolating and reclusion spaces. So these artificial, well-defined boundaries, I think, that are the first link I can see between the two objects that we're talking about today. But even though, I really think that my presentation today is not going to be an answer to my question about what are the connections, or at least it begins to open some. Still, I am an ongoing project, so bear with me if this is going to look very open without a clear answer. But I think that it's quite useful to kind of list, or at least pinpoint there some references that can help us following my reflection about these connections. So both in common discourse and in media literature, association appear between the island and the ship on the symbolic level. For example, through the metaphorical use of words and terms such as floating prisons in connection to the way that, we can triangulate the island, the prison, and the ship, but also referring to ships, the use of floating islands has been found through academic literature. Moreover, other connections appear in different ways in the existing literature. For example, Foucault was mentioned before, who spoke about the carceral archipelago, but also Edouard Glissant in 1997 wrote about the root of slavery and the post-colonial in the Antilles, tying together the figures of the boat, the island, and the archipelago, which are, as by his words, are deeply rooted in the corporality of islands, histories, identities, and sovereignties. Other authors who talked about these connections are Jude McCulloch, for example, who in 2007 argued that the island is a very well-used metaphor for prison. So you can see where all my reflections come from. But to go a bit more into the details, I draw on Alison Mount's work, who really did a great job about connecting islands and detentions. And in particular, she states that the island appears and is reproduced in other forms. Bases, meaning military bases, bodies, prisons. And island spaces also show, and this is, I think, very interesting, a tendency toward the topological reproduction of the form of the island. So bases and prisons on islands become islands within the island. Prisons within bases become island within island within islands, and solitary confinement cells within them, islands within islands within islands within islands, and so on and so forth. And if we connect this with the work of very well-known island studies authors like Stratford et al., who in 2011 mentioned that it seems that most islands invariably embrace other islands within their spatial ambit. Smaller islands off their coasts, larger islands, mainlands, who knows, we can think, we were talking about today about mainland or bigger island, are bigger island mainland or not, you know, big questions. Anyway, so larger islands to which they belong and internal islands. So all of these kind of brought to a question, can the ship be seen as a floating island, connected to other islands? Can an island outside, can it be framed as an island outside another island, and for what scope? So that's what kind of guided me through this first part of my research. So the way I want to further explore these first connections is through a focus on the various forms of mobilities and immobilities involving and revolving around islands and ships in relation to the migration in the Mediterranean Sea. This morning we already mentioned the role of spatial mobility, the spatial and mobility turn, to set the island in motion in the eyes of the scholars, so I'm not going to go there, but just to remind you that it's also some reference in my literature. But in this work, I really want to draw your attention on the interpretative category of constellation as something that, as something that is recognizable only when looked at as a whole, from kind of like a far away distance. But so when it is looked against the vault of the sky, we can assign meanings to it and read it in its ensemble. But at the same time, if we consider the complexity and let's call it the three-dimensional nature of the constellation, we can get the diachronic perspective and catch the very distinctive characters of the elements that composes it. So this is how I got to imagine a constellation, or recalling the archipelagic thinking, but I think it's slightly different, that's why I'm sticking to the constellation, made of islands of confinement, imprisonment, detention, marginalization, limbo, but as well as islands of rebellion, breakout, escapes, passage, as an ensemble that can give us the chance to really see, or at least try to see meanings otherwise scattered and isolated. So allowing us to explore them at different scales, as well as considering the national and international politics at play, the economics regulation that are behind mobilities and immobilities on islands. So I really think also that the constellation metaphor is a fruitful one, as it allows us in somehow to consider the long term, not only looking back into the past, but also kind of like trying to see forward in what could be in the future. This category I really hope is going to be fruitful for me in framing what so far may appear scattered or apparently scattered observation on islands and ships in their connectedness through the immobilities, macro-mobilities, micro-mobilities around island and the ship. Just a couple of words about the EU bordering kind of system and why we talk a lot about islands when we talk about human migration. Well, the EU bordering policies, and Martha, I think, framed it perfectly even earlier, have been moving borders outward. So the externalization of borders is something that has been going on for many years by now. And in this process, islands became a very crucial point of investigation. Kind of connecting again to this idea of constellation, when viewed in isolation, I think islands' detention with migrant connotation, let's say, can appear kind of ad hoc or circumstantial, a matter of convenience due to very often to the physical geography, so their position. But I really think that when connected one another, other significant factors come into play, including their political status, their colonial and post-colonial histories. This refers, for example, to the use of islands by Australia, for example, but not only, but also political and economic interests. Moreover, when we talk about migrants' mobilities and immobilities on islands, it's not only a matter, and this I think is quite interesting to get then understand what I will be talking about, it's not only a matter of fencing off or locking in, so it's not about only physical control and immobilization, as again, like other presentation before me kind of made clear, but it has a lot to do with the hindrances, with active abandonment, with filtering, labeling, and sorting of people. So it's my connection between the ship and the island doesn't really want to only look at the fact that people are immobilized, but I really would like to go a bit farther than that. So again, it's not only a matter of who can move, but also what kind of movement is allowed, what movement can be performed, and this is all clearly related to power balance. Yeah, I think the right slide, sorry, got lost. So in this sense, probably I skipped one slide, who knows, it's fine. No, it's the right one, sorry. So in this sense, let's go back to this. We know usually the journey between the North African coast or the Middle East, accordingly, towards Europe as a play that has to do with policy implementation, economic interest, fortuity, we saw this before, and migrants on agency, of course. And I think the same elements play a role in the human and non-human mobilities that are part of migrants' geographic experience on the space of the islands themselves. So, which relations that they can create on the islands that can prompt new material and symbolic relations that take place through this, again, this geographic experience. So these are the mobilities I want to explore in the next few minutes. I will just give you a sort of like very broad look here. So we know more or less that we think of the movement, at least of migrants, from point A to point B. This is not the case. We know that the broad type of movement involving these people is never linear, but it's never in a sequence, but it's much more a kind of movement that revolves around abrupt interruption, circularity, and movement that can be refrained or repeated and so on. So I tried here to put some stages that we recognize usually looking from the outside, but which of course are just a way to pinpoint where I'm going to focus today, not because this is the representation of the real movement itself. So what I would like to do is to focus on the island and the ship in this sort of process to look at these micro and micro mobilities that revolve around these two stages of migration. So if we think of the island, I try to kind of like put here some of the bits of the first reasonings I went through. So we have a space, a geographical space, which is thought as immobile, usually, like that's how we frame it. But at the same time, we can look at islands and mobilities, looking at migrants, immobilities towards the island. So this kind of journey that we usually picture when we think of migration, but also migrants' mobilities on the island, the mobility of other subjects that are related to the migration that kind of get on the island and then move on the island themselves. But also we can think of mobility of information and imaginaries, as well as journeys back to the island, which I kind of separated from this first part of kind of the journey, because as I will try to explain later, sometimes these are not movements, let's say, these are not mobilities that relate directly to their let's say, main migration path. So I'm not talking about those cases when you arrive to Lampedusa, you're pushed back or sent back, you have to go through again, but I'm much more talking about those people who kind of get a sort of legal status of any type, that we know there are many, and are able then to go back to the island. So let's see if I can get through this. Please, Erika, stop me because I know that this can go on for 5 hours. So really, like, give me signs when it's too late. So I will just show you a few of these steps and like try to share with you the reasonings I'm going through with these mobilities movements. Here, the first one is a painting, is a drawing by Francesco Piobbichi. This person drew these. The title of this work is "The Dance of the Isothermal Blanket." It represents a woman who dances on the Molo Favaloro dock, like the pier that Stefano was mentioning before. She's moving in this dance with an isothermal blanket as if it was a drape. What happened? She was there to assist the arrivals, the disembarkation of migrants on a day and a night that was very long, very tiring. Hundreds of people arrived, some of them already dead, unfortunately. So what happened is that at one point she decided, everyone was quite desperate and feeling, just feeling horrible about this whole situation. She just decided to start dancing, so creating this movement that somehow wanted to create a sense of relief or liberation. I choose this image rather than just migrants disembarking because I think that already can catch kind of mobilities that can revolve around these places. Let's go to the other side of the island. So this is the hotspot of Lampedusa, the reception center. About this place, it's quite interesting to notice that over time the mobility of people changed quite a lot. At the very early stage, it was much easier to. It was much more porous, let's say, detention, so people were able to get in and out, even though not officially, but with time going on, it has become more difficult, and by now it's basically impossible because there are military kind of like checks everywhere, even in the spot where this picture was taken. And I think that this really represents the core of the power exercise over mobility, not because it's the only place, but it kind of represents it quite well. But as I said, like migrants could sometimes appropriate the space of the island for demonstrations and protests, not only but also for that, which very often led to strengthened relations with part of the local population sometimes, or also with solidarity movement committed people or activists. So this picture was taken in 2019. These were a group of people from Tunisia who rebelled against being their destiny of being deported. And what happened, and which I found very interesting, is that through their ability to like kind of occupy the space of the island, they were able to then apply for asylum, which for Tunisia never really happens in Italy, and they avoided to be deported in the end. But mobilization around the island can take different shapes. Here we can see someone from the solidarity movements claiming for open the ports when the politics in Italy wanted to close them. I mean, there is a lot to say about humanitarianism and also solidarity movements. Before Nicola mentioned something, so I'm not going to go in there. But still, some people arriving on the island, kind of connecting with it and connecting somehow with all the migration is there. However, immobilities on Lampedusa can take different forms and shapes, and it is related also to the bodies who lost their life at sea. Not everyone, just a small percentage of those who are found dead in the Mediterranean, in the closest area of Lampedusa, are actually resting in the cemetery of the island. But because most of the time they're relocated, there wouldn't be enough space. But what I find very interesting is that these people staying here somehow, and this is something I got from a reflection from an interview. Maybe I can quote it if I find the right bit. an interviewee told me it's a kind of meeting place between worlds which are often represented as conflictual and in opposition. So this observation for me was very significant because it underlined somehow that even not directly, basically the cemetery was the only normal place of the island where people were actually kind of included in the society of the island. So this kind of relations through death was quite striking for me, even though at the same time you can see that there is a difference in the visual of the graves, but still there was a sort of integration, and people would go visit these graves. So I think it really represents interesting connections with people on the island and solidarity movement as well who go there. Going on, I want to show, I don't know if we have enough time, I wanted to show you a bit of a video, but really quickly.
No, don't panic.
Don't panic, I will do this. Nope. Come on. It worked before it started. No way. No. Okay, doesn't matter. I will tell you about it. It's fine. It's a shame. It was really interesting to listen to this. It was like 30 minutes literally, but it was a video by a documentary, a testimonial documentary video where two people. It was a video by Mario Badagliacca. You can prove in Lampedusa. You can find it online on the Archivio delle Memorie Migranti website. It's very interesting because they were talking about this idea of going back that I was mentioning before, where the willingness to go back from these two people, Mohammed and Zakaria, who arrived in Lampedusa many years ago. They arrived in 2008. They were expressing their willingness to go back to Lampedusa, and they actually did in the end. And something quite interesting was they were talking about among the reasons they wanted to go was about their dignity. So go back, see the island with other eyes, but also kind of have the chance to be there with dignity. So I found it also quite interesting to look at how people kind of go back to the island from a very different perspective. This picture is showing us another way to go back for an official commemoration. In this case, this is the 3rd of October. Probably you've heard about this. Now it's an official national day in Italy. It's the national day for the victims of immigration, which itself already tells about the type of policies we have in Italy about that. But it's still interesting because it really mobilizes hundreds of people, not only from Italy but all around Europe. Many of them connected to schools, which is also very interesting, who reached Lampedusa for that day, for this commemoration. And also brings us back to the reasoning of who can move and how can they move, because while there are these demonstrations every year on October 3rd, people are still locked in their hotspot, people are still dying at sea. Going on, and I will try to close as soon as I can. The same type of reasoning went through for me was I tried to do the same type of reasoning for the ship, which in itself instead is a mobile object. And again, here we can look at migrants' immobilities towards the ship, their immobilities on the ship itself, towards a reception center, the street, or the just a repatriation center afterwards. And but we can connect it with the onboard staff and their mobilities, and the relative mobility of the ship itself, information and so on. So I will try to make it quick. I choose this. This is, I think, the only image I put of the ship. I choose this one because I think it's quite disturbing and it's just very disturbing looking at this. So I'm not going to say much more than that. Sorry, it's 5:30. We can kind of get to that easily. No, I kind of found 7 steps, and I try to go through these quite quickly. As you can see, I use mostly, in this case, quotes from either my own interviews with people who were on board staff of the quarantine ships, or quotes used by other authors who worked on the same topic. So the first theme I found was, of course, the detention, control and confinement one. And I think it's quite interesting to look at how this was represented by people I talked to. So although we did not have police on the ship, those who performed security function were there. And also their reactions of people being stuck in the boat were sometimes really strong, also because they were locked in a ship where there is no window, there is nothing. The space is small and you spend a whole of your day locked in a room like a prisoner. Of course, the reactions are strong. So of course the idea is that the ship is a space for immobilization, for detention. What happens though inside the ship? So looking at what the kind of inside mobility, what came out is that this ship had different shapes, but more or less they were structured the same way. So my ship had 3 floors with cabins. Then there was a car park that was the reception area. Can you think of the welcoming we used to give in a car park? Also, another quote said, imagine that the decks were narrow and long and people came out through this little door where there was a little table blocking the entrance. So basically people lived their days either through the cabin, like in the cabin, or in these small corridors. And also another quote that said, on these ships we were all crammed together, both guests and operators and mediators. That's what it's like. You've got 100, 150 guys all piled up along a bridge where there are 10, 20 rooms. So again, the idea of being kind of stuck and detained kind of passed through also the inner side of the ship, and looking at the movements they could have inside the space. But I think it's quite interesting to look also about the body in the same kind of space and how it related to the space of the ship. They say, like a couple of interviewees told me, on those days when the sea gets rough, because these ships, and we'll see this in a second, very often were not docked or were not moored, but they were outside at sea. So on those days when the sea gets rough, practically everyone gets sick, everyone. Lots of people throwing up. The ship make movements that bother people. And also another person told me, I had a chronic cystitis because I didn't drink and didn't have time to go to the toilet because of the work they had to carry out was quite a big load. They work also like 12, 15-hour shifts sometimes. So I think this is very interesting because it brings us back, even though I'm not talking about migrants' view on their relationship with the ship, I think brings back the idea that the space of the island kind of affected bodies in very different ways, and weirdly enough, because it doesn't really happen all the time, connected a lot everyone on the ship the kind of the same way, not the same way exactly, but closer enough. So this is the other one of the other things. So the mobility of the ship itself. I try to pinpoint the ports where the ships were anchored, but as I said, they didn't really stay still there. But as some of the interviews pointed out, we were often either in Augusta, in Lampedusa, or at other ports, and she said we moved according to what they asked. So they is the prefecture of Rome. We would pick up people, take them where we were told. These movements were related to landings and embarkation and to the ship vacancies. So there was this whole movement related to like where people were and where people had to disembark. But the other very interesting part is that these movements of the boat could also trigger other feelings. So at one point someone said, I remember very well that people would realize that the ship was turning, and they would start asking, are you taking us back to Libya now? So every now and then these fears would erupt, and we would. They said we would leave in the morning and return in the evening back in the port, but this also connected to not only to the movement itself of the ships, but also to other kind of memories, feelings of migrants themselves. About the moving of the ship, there is something else I want to say, but we'll see if there is space in the Q&A time, because yeah, it's late. So talking about relations, I really think that also the shape and the space of the ship interestingly create relations and ties in a very different way. So someone was mentioning that through the group, among the group of colleagues, relationship could be very strong, either in a positive or negative manner, but also some kind of relations, even though they were really hindered, because we saw before, people were stuck in corridors, but in theory they could not exit their own corridors. What happens is that they would somehow get to have these small connections. In this case, an operator was telling about, through the children and their mothers, they could get some connection and do some activities with children, getting colors, and try to spend a bit time together, even though it was very difficult. The almost last point I want to make is about returning, which is something we already talked about also for what concerns Lampedusa. But in this case, I think it's very interesting to see that this returning kind of movement goes in very different directions. So this is one quote that I didn't take from my interviews, but it's Denaro and Bocagna who took it. But it's very interesting because it kind of resonates with other things I've been told. So the person interviewed said, "The ship then moved. I don't know what kind of ship it was. At some point, however, we arrived in Lampedusa. I recognized it immediately. I arrived there 5 years ago. I could never forget it. And I asked myself, what am I doing here again? Why is this quote here? Because people who were stuck on these ships were not only new arrivals, but were also, at one point, people who were already in the reception centers in Italy that got COVID and were brought to these ships. So it kind of like put in motion another group of people who in theory was already past that step. But it's interesting that also there is this panic of seeing Lampedusa again as something, why am I here once more in my life? And this resonates with something, not the same, but something slightly similar that I was told by an interviewee, a mediator on the ship, who said seeing people being stacked one on top of the other, or seeing them with their feet cut, their hands cut, some with really serious injuries who came from Libya, seeing those things which I experienced firsthand. So that's what the ship reminded me a lot of. So even the ship itself could kind of resonate with other connections they already had. The very last topic I want to point out is about the aim of these ships. A person told me they were not quarantine ships, they were waiting ships, which goes back to probably the old presentation of Marte. We could connect what is waiting, what is stuckness, and so on. But also other people mentioned that the ship's aim basically was that of facilitating the mechanism of repatriation. As one operator told me, the entry door was one, the exit door was one. So when we were disembarking, the port was packed with police, so where else should they go? Of course, this made it very smooth, and those days they spent on the ship were actually the days spent for the Italian government to organize their repatriation. So it really made it much more smooth in that sense. And the other element that comes up is the one of the one that Nicola Montagna was mentioning about the fear of people escaping, the fear of people in Italy kind of rebelling against these, crisis, invasion. We know all of those narratives, but also there is a sort of economic element in there, because these ships were much more expensive than having quarantine hotspots on land, on ashore. But the tourism was not going on over the last over those couple of years, so probably there is also that element going on, like the money spent on these ships was really massive. There is not much transparency also on that. It's quite difficult to find documents. But I will try to conclude here before it gets really late. I just would like to say that the immobilities that relate to the ship and the island, as well as these people's mobilities, we saw are never linear, but that could be recursive or circular, and at the same time can really bring us to see a constellation of movements. These mobilities are often tightly connected to a variety of relations created among people and or with the island space, as we saw in the first part of the kind of presentation. However, the opportunities for creating these ties seem to diminish both on the island, then on the quarantine ship, as the process of tightening the porosity of Lampedusa's reception center already from 2019 and now even more is fully implemented. So in 2021, as I mentioned before, it was really impossible the military control really made it impossible to create this porosity anymore. So the space of the island becomes also inaccessible. It kind of constrains the chances to connect with the island, and I wonder if it does ideally also kind of hindrance or kind of stops the possibility of going back even afterwards, as the relations with and the mobility on the island kind of get lost. And at the same time, if this happens, I wonder what could be, if we look at the island space as an open space that kind of made possible to create these connections, I wonder what happens on the space of a ship where we can consider it much more closed and where the connections and ties are much more complicated, even though we can see that some were created. So just to conclude, I think that connections between the ships and the island is not only related to as I said before, the confinement function, the immobilities that revolve around them open to a wider range of possibilities, which can foster the understanding and visibility of geographies of power that lie behind the hindrances and acceleration of migrants' movement, porous and fluid spaces they traverse, and I really wonder what these geographies of power then produce. As I said, no conclusions to really give an answer, just a lot of questions. Thank you.